Hey everyone! Welcome back to Eclipse Wizardry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Daphne Greengrass saved Harry from Dursleys at age 9 and Greengrass family magic bonded them? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Accord. The magic came for Daphne on a Tuesday. She would remember that detail clearly for the rest of her life, not the date, not the weather, not what she'd been wearing, but the day of the week, because Tuesdays were when her mother took her into the Muggle parts of Surrey to practice what Daphne Greengrass called observational discretion. The ability to move through a non-magical world without announcing yourself. Without flinching. Without looking like you'd never seen a petrol station before, which, prior to these outings, Daphne absolutely had not. You cannot navigate a world you refuse to understand, her mother had told her, back when these Tuesday trips began. Daphne Greengrass was not a woman who repeated herself, so Daphne had taken it seriously. Today she was doing well enough at the observational discretion. She was 9 years old, her dark hair in a neat plait down her back, wearing Muggle clothes that her mother had selected with characteristic precision, jeans, a light blue shirt, trainers that Daphne privately found hideous. She walked beside Serena through the orderly, aggressively normal streets of Little Whinging, watching the Muggle children on their bicycles, the fathers washing their cars, the whole relentlessly tidy performance of suburban life. Then something happened in her chest. It wasn't pain. It wasn't quite a feeling at all, not in the way that feelings normally arrived, gradually, with context, attached to a reason. This was something else. It was like a compass needle swinging hard to find north, except the compass was somewhere behind her sternum, and north was apparently a privet hedge on a residential street 3 blocks to the left. She stopped walking. Daphne. Her mother's voice was careful. Serena had noticed immediately, she always did. Something's pulling, Daphne said. She pressed 2 fingers to the center of her chest without really meaning to, a gesture so instinctive it surprised her. Mother. Something's pulling at me. Daphne Greengrass went very still. The particular kind of still that meant she was thinking fast and hard and didn't want Daphne to see how fast and hard. Then she looked in the direction Daphne had been facing without being told which direction that was. The family magic, she said quietly. You're sure? I don't know what else it would be. That was the right answer. Serena reached down and took Daphne's hand, which she almost never did in public. Her mother was not an unaffectionate woman, but she was a precise one, and unnecessary gestures in Muggle spaces were the kind of thing she'd spent years training against. The fact that she took Daphne's hand now told Daphne everything she needed to know about how seriously this was being taken. Then we follow it, her mother said. Carefully. Privet Drive looked like every other street in Little Whinging, which was to say it looked like it had been designed by someone with a very firm opinion about what a street should look like and absolutely no tolerance for deviation. The houses were identical in the way that houses became when no one involved in building them had ever thought about anything interesting. The gardens were neat. The cars were practical. The whole thing had the energy of a place that would report you to a committee if you parked wrong. Number 4 had a particularly well-kept garden. That was the first thing Daphne noticed. The second thing she noticed was the flower beds, which were freshly weeded, and the third thing she noticed was the small, thin boy doing the weeding. He couldn't have been more than 9. He was small for it, genuinely small, not just young-looking small, the kind of small that spoke to something more systematic than genetics. His hair was black and wildly untidy, sticking up in approximately 11 directions, and he was wearing clothes that were so oversized they seemed to be wearing him rather than the other way round. He was weeding with methodical care, his hands working through the soil with the particular focus of someone doing a task they've done too many times to think about, and when he reached up to push his glasses back up his nose, Daphne saw the scar. The lightning bolt scar. She'd known about Harry Potter. Every child in the wizarding world knew about Harry Potter, the way they knew about the Founders or the Goblin Rebellions, as history. A fact. Something that had happened and been resolved, filed away under things that shaped our world. She had never thought about him as a person who was currently somewhere, doing something. She had certainly never thought about him crouching in a garden in Surrey, too thin, too quiet, wearing his cousin's cast-offs. The pull in her chest was almost painful now. "Mother," she said. "I see him," Serena said. Her voice had gone very neutral, which was its own kind of signal. The boy, Harry Potter, hadn't noticed them yet. He was focused on the weeding with that same excessive concentration, the kind of focus that Daphne recognized from her own lessons when the alternative to focusing was letting your mind go somewhere worse. There was a bruise on his left forearm. Old enough to be yellowing at the edges. Daphne looked at her mother. Serena Greengrass was looking at the bruise with an expression that was almost imperceptibly tight around the eyes. Almost. "Why is he here?" Daphne asked quietly. "Shouldn't Dumbledore have?" "Yes," her mother said. Short. Definitive. "Yes, he should have." The absence of elaboration was its own elaboration. Harry Potter looked up then. He had very green eyes, startlingly green, and when they landed on Daphne and her mother he went through a rapid sequence of small expressions, wariness first, then something that was almost nothing, a practiced blankness, and then a kind of confused assessment when he clearly couldn't place them in the context of his usual world. Not neighbors. Not his aunt's friends. Not anyone who should be looking at him. "Hello," Daphne said, because her mother hadn't spoken and someone needed to. The boy blinked. "Hello," he said, cautiously, like it might be a trick. Up close, he was even thinner than she'd thought. She could see the faint outline of his collarbones above the enormous neckline of his shirt. His hands were dirty from the garden and there was a long thin scratch across the back of his right hand that had the look of something deliberate. The compass in her chest was practically screaming. "I'm Daphne," she said. "This is my mother." Serena Greengrass, her mother said, and her voice was warm in a way it very rarely was with strangers, a warmth that Daphne recognized as genuine and therefore slightly alarming. "And you're Harry." Something flashed across his face. Not surprise at being recognized, he was probably used to that in the wizarding world, but something more guarded. Like he was recalibrating what kind of conversation this was about to be. "Yes," he said, slowly. "Are your relatives home?" Serena asked pleasantly, as though she were asking about the weather. Harry looked at the house, then back at them. "My uncle's at work. My aunt's inside." A pause. "And my cousin's at a friend's house." Serena looked at the house for a moment. Then she looked at Daphne. Daphne nodded. She didn't know exactly what she was agreeing to, but the magic in her chest was certain, and she had decided, somewhere in the last 5 minutes, that she was going to trust it. "Harry," Serena said, crouching down to his level with the fluid ease of a woman who did not find this undignified, "would you mind if I spoke with your aunt for a moment?" Petunia Dursley was not what Daphne had expected. She was tall, horse-faced in a way that seemed personally aggressive, and she had opened her front door wearing an expression of bright social performance that collapsed almost immediately when she saw Serena Greengrass. Because Serena, even in Muggle clothes, had the quality of someone who occupied the top of a hierarchy without needing to announce it, the kind of presence that certain very old families produced and that Petunia, who cared enormously about certain kinds of status and understood, at some animal level, that she was looking at a kind she could not compete with, responded to by going slightly pale. Daphne stayed in the garden with Harry while the adults went inside. She could feel the faint hum of a Muffliato-adjacent charm sealing the front room. Her mother had an extensive repertoire of charms she could cast without wand or word, something that Daphne was working toward and had not yet achieved. She sat down on the garden wall. After a moment, Harry sat down too, though he left significant space between them. "You're magical," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She looked at him. "So are you." "I know." He said it without pride or bitterness, just flat acknowledgement, and she thought that was probably the saddest way anyone had ever said "I know" in the history of the English language. They don't like it, I gathered. He pushed his glasses up again. They were held together at one hinge with a strip of sellotape, she noticed. She filed that information away in the same place she'd filed the oversized clothes and the bruise and the scratch on his hand. "What does your mother want?" he asked. Direct. Not rude, just precise in the way that people who'd learned to read situations for danger tended to be. Daphne thought about how to answer that. She was 9 years old and she'd only had the Greengrass family magic pull her toward something once before, toward her little sister Astoria, just after she was born, a warm tugging recognition of family, yours, connected, and she didn't have a framework yet for what it meant when it pulled her toward a stranger. "She wants to make sure you're all right," Daphne said, which was true as far as it went. Harry looked at her with those very green eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'm fine. You have a bruise on your arm." "I fell." "On what?" A long pause. "Stairs." "Stairs that hit you on the underside of the forearm?" Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, something more reluctant than that, the involuntary response of someone encountering an argument they haven't prepared for. "You're quite annoying," he said. "I've been told." She looked at the house. "How long have you been living in that cupboard?" He went very still. The same stillness his mother had demonstrated on the street, Daphne noted, that too careful, too controlled absence of response that was its own answer. "How did you? There's a cat flap on the door under the stairs," she said. "And it has a lock on the outside." Harry Potter stared at her. Then he laughed, short and sharp, like something had broken loose. "Fine," he said. "Since I was 1. Daphne looked at the house again. The pull in her chest had settled into something steady and deep, like a bass note, like a heartbeat that wasn't quite hers. She thought about her own bedroom at Greengrass Manor, the window that looked out over the south garden, the bookshelves her father had built to exactly her height, the way Astoria sometimes crept in at 3 in the morning and fell asleep on the foot of her bed. She thought about a cupboard. "You won't be going back in there," she said. He looked at her. "You can't know that." "I know it," she said simply, and the magic in her chest said yes, true, certain, and Daphne Greengrass had always trusted her family's magic more than she trusted most people. She never knew exactly what Serena said to Petunia Dursley. Her mother was not a woman who narrated her methods. What she knew was that when Serena came back out of the house 20 minutes later, she was carrying a small, battered shoe box that contained the sum total of Harry Potter's possessions, a broken toy soldier, a photo of a smiling couple, and a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a letter from his first primary school teacher saying he was a pleasure to teach, and Petunia was standing in the doorway wearing the expression of someone who had agreed to something they didn't fully understand but felt, on some deep instinctive level, that they were not in a position to refuse. Harry watched his aunt. His aunt did not look at him. Something passed across his face, not grief, exactly. More like the closing of a door that had been standing open for a very long time, and the relief and the loss of it happening simultaneously. "Harry," Serena said, and her voice was the warm version again, "I think you'd better come with us." He looked from her to Daphne to the shoebox. "Where?" "Home," Serena said. Daphne watched him process that word. She could see it land strangely, like a phrase in a language he'd studied but hadn't heard spoken aloud before. "What about, there are laws," he said. "About where I have to stay." "Blood protection." He was 9 years old and already quoting protective magical legislation, which told Daphne quite a lot about what Harry Potter had done with the hours he'd spent in that cupboard. "Dumbledore said," Dumbledore, Serena said pleasantly, "is not here." Another pause. Harry looked at the house one more time. Then he picked up the shoe box. "All right," he said. Greengrass Manor was in Wiltshire, set back from the road behind a line of ancient oaks that had been there since before the road existed. It was not Malfoy Manor, Daphne had been to Malfoy Manor twice and found it magnificent and deeply unpleasant, like a beautiful cage. Greengrass Manor was something more comfortable than impressive, stone walls worn soft by centuries, rooms full of books and comfortable furniture, and the particular lived-in feeling that only accumulated in houses that had been genuinely loved for a very long time. Harry walked through the front door and stopped. Daphne watched him. He was looking at the entrance hall, the high ceiling, the family tapestry on the wall, the late afternoon light coming through the tall windows in long gold rectangles, with the expression of someone who had been shown a door they'd given up believing existed. Astoria appeared at the top of the stairs. She was 7 years old, Daphne's sister, and she had their mother's lighter coloring and their father's complete absence of social self-consciousness, and she looked down at Harry Potter from the top step with the frank assessment of a child who had no concept of how unnerving that assessment was. "Is that the magical orphan?" she asked. "Astoria," Daphne said. "What?" "Mother said he might be coming and I wanted to see." She came down the stairs with a complete lack of ceremony, stopped directly in front of Harry, and looked up at him. "Your hair is very untidy." Harry, who had been staring at the ceiling, looked down at her. Something in his expression, that guarded, careful blankness, cracked slightly. "I know," he said. "You can have my old room if you want," Astoria said, with the generosity of someone who had recently been upgraded to a better room and therefore found this easy. "It has a window that looks at the garden. There's a tree outside. I used to climb it." She paused. "Daphne says it's undignified to climb trees." "I think Daphne is wrong about a lot of things." "I'm standing right here," Daphne said. "I know." Astoria looked at Harry again. "Do you like trees?" Harry seemed to be recalibrating his understanding of reality in real time. "I've never climbed one," he said. Astoria stared at him. "Never?" "I wasn't really allowed outside much." The look on Astoria's face then, 7 years old and already so expressive it was almost theatrical, was one of absolute, offended indignation on his behalf. She turned to her mother with the full force of it. "Mom." "I know, sweetheart," Serena said. "That's terrible." "Yes," Serena said. "It is." Harry looked at the floor. Daphne watched the muscle in his jaw tighten and release, and she understood that someone being angry for him rather than at him was probably not something he'd encountered very often, and that this had its own complicated weight. "Where is father?" Daphne asked her mother. "Coming. I contacted him when we were en route." Serena set the shoe box down on the hall table and turned to face Harry fully. She had the kind of still attention that made people feel genuinely seen, which Daphne had always found slightly terrifying when directed at her. "Harry. Are you hungry?" He opened his mouth, clearly about to say no or "I'm fine" or some other automatic deflection, and then stopped. "Thought about it?" "Yes," he said, in a voice that sounded slightly surprised at itself. "Kitchen, then," Serena said. "Pipsy will make you whatever you'd like." "Pipsy is the house elf," Astoria informed him helpfully. "She likes it when you tell her what you want. She gets offended if you just say whatever is fine because she says it makes her feel like a vending machine, which I looked up and it means a machine that gives you food, which sounds brilliant actually, but I think it's rude when it's a person." Harry followed them toward the kitchen, and Daphne fell into step beside him, and the compass in her chest was quiet and settled and certain in a way it had never quite been before. Cyrus Greengrass arrived by fluid 2 hours after that, smelling of old books and the particular variety of wood smoke that meant he'd come from his solicitor's office in Diagon Alley. He was a tall man, lean, with Daphne's coloring, dark hair going slightly gray at the temples, sharp gray eyes that assessed situations the way other people read contracts, quickly and completely. He came through the fireplace into the sitting room, brushed the soot from his jacket with the efficiency of long practice, and stopped. Harry was sitting at the kitchen table with Astoria, who had decided in the last 2 hours that he was the best thing that had ever happened to her and was showing him an illustrated book about dragons with the absolute confidence of someone sharing a treasure. He was eating, really eating, not the polite picking of someone performing an appetite, but the focused consumption of someone who had been genuinely hungry for a very long time, a plate of what Pipsy had enthusiastically described as proper food. Young master, none of this soup nonsense, which had turned out to be roast chicken and potatoes and 3 different kinds of vegetable. Cyrus looked at his wife. Serena met his eyes. Something passed between them in the way that things pass between people who have been married for a long time, wordless, complete, carrying more information in 2 seconds than most conversations carry in 20 minutes. Then Cyrus Greengrass walked into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and said, "You must be Harry." Harry looked up. He had the careful animal assessment going again, reading Cyrus the way he'd read everything else, for threat potential, for what kind of person this was, for whether the rules here were the same as the rules at Privet Drive. "Yes, sir. I'm Cyrus Greengrass." He didn't extend his hand. He just sat, in the easy, undemonstrative way of a man entirely comfortable in his own house. "I understand my wife and daughter found you weeding petunias." "Yes, sir." "Are you any good at it?" Harry blinked. "At weeding?" "I suppose. I've had a lot of practice." "Useful skill," Cyrus said seriously, and then reached across and poured himself a cup of tea from the pot, and the conversation moved on, and Harry watched this with those green eyes tracking every step of it like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop and slowly, beginning to suspect it might not. Later, after Astoria had been put to bed and Harry had been shown to his room, Astoria's old room, with the window above the garden and the climbable tree outside, Daphne found her parents in her father's study. The door was slightly open. She didn't push it further, but she heard her father's voice. "The blood wards. Weakened to the point of technical compliance," her mother said. "Petunia's feelings for the boy are not, there is no love there to sustain the magic. There never has been. Whatever Dumbledore built, it's been crumbling for years. He'll notice." "Yes." A pause. "And you want to invoke the accord?" Daphne's family magic responded to him, Cyrus. Not curiosity. Not sympathy. Recognition. The same response she had to Astoria. Silence. Daphne pressed closer to the door. "You understand what that means," her father said slowly. "If we invoke the accord, we are claiming him. Not guardianship. Not fostering. The magic won't allow half measures. I know. He'll be bound to this family. The family magic will bond to his. I know. Dumbledore will, I know." Her mother's voice was quiet and very firm. "Cyrus. He's been sleeping in a cupboard for 8 years. He has a bruise on his arm and a scratch on his hand that didn't come from a fall. He is Harry Potter, and our family magic claimed him, and I will not spend the rest of my life wondering what happened to him because it was politically inconvenient to act." Another silence, longer this time. Then her father made a sound that Daphne recognized as the sound of a decision being finalized. "I'll need to prepare the working," he said. 2 days. I know. And we should tell Daphne what it means. What her role in it is. She already knows, her mother said quietly. She's been feeling it all evening. Daphne, in the hallway, pressed her hand flat against the wall and felt the house's magic hum faintly against her palm. Old stone, old timber, old binding spells laid down across generations, and thought about the compass in her chest, and about a boy with green eyes and sellotaped glasses who didn't know how to climb a tree. 2 days was exactly long enough for Harry to relax slightly, which meant that when he walked into the main hall on Thursday morning and found it rearranged, the furniture pushed to the edges, the family tapestry taken down, candles placed at the cardinal points of a circle that Daphne's father had chalked onto the stone floor in something that caught the light like it was slightly more than chalk, he had just enough comfort established to not immediately bolt. He stood in the doorway and looked at it. Then he looked at Daphne. She was standing beside her father. She was wearing, at her mother's instruction, a dress in deep green, the color of the Greengrass family, which was not Slytherin by coincidence but by precedent, the house having been founded in the same century the family's magic had first been documented. She'd spent the last 2 days explaining things to Harry in the careful, unsentimental way she approached most things, giving him facts and context without dramatizing them, because she'd noticed that drama made him close off and information made him open up. She had explained the family magic. She had explained the accord, older than most formal magical contracts, a binding that predated the ministry by centuries, the kind of magic that families like the Greengrasses still carried in their bloodlines like a fossil carrying the impression of an ancient bone. She had explained what it would mean. He had listened with the particular quality of attention she'd already started to recognize as distinctly Harry, completely still, no interruptions, no expressions, and then at the end, "It means I'd actually be part of your family?" She'd said yes. He'd been quiet for a long time. Then, would I have to do anything? You'd have to mean it. Mean what? That you accept it. The magic can tell. He'd been quiet for another long time, and she'd waited, because she was beginning to understand that Harry Potter needed space to find his way to things, that rushing him made him defensive and patience made him brave. "All right," he'd said eventually. "Yes." Now he walked into the circle without being asked, which made her father raise an eyebrow very slightly. It was the look Cyrus Greengrass wore when something impressed him but he was trying not to show it. "Stand in the center," her father said. Daphne, beside him. She moved into the circle. Harry was standing very straight, the glasses slightly crooked on his nose, the oversized clothes absurd against the formality of the moment. She stood beside him, close enough that their arms nearly touched. Her mother took the north position. Her father took the south. The candles at east and west were unattended, but they lit themselves, which they always did for workings of this kind, because the house knew what was happening. Old magic always recognized itself. "Harry James Potter," her father said, and his voice carried the measured weight of a man who understood the full gravity of the words he was using, "this family offers you its name, its blood, and its protection, under the terms of the ancient accord, freely and without condition of return. Do you accept?" Harry swallowed. Daphne could see it. "Yes," he said. Clear. Firm. Meant. Daphne Aloan Greengrass, her mother said, and her voice was low and warm and very old somehow, carrying something underneath it that wasn't quite sound. "You are the first of this generation to feel the accord's call. You are the bridge between this family and the one who comes. Do you affirm the bond?" Daphne had been working toward this moment in her head for 2 days. She'd practiced what she was going to say, how she was going to say it, whether she was certain. She looked at Harry, at the scar and the crooked glasses and the carefully held composure and the green eyes that held, beneath all the practiced blankness, a desperate, frightened, furious hope. "I affirm it," she said. Her mother raised her wand. Her father raised his. The chalk circle on the floor began to glow, gold first and then green, deep, rich, the green of old forests and growing things and the magic that had been in this family's stone since before the stone was quarried. The light rose around them. Daphne felt it hit her like a warmth moving outward from her chest, spreading through her fingers and up the back of her skull, and it was not unlike the pull that had started on Tuesday, except this time it was not pulling her towards something, it was connecting her to something, knitting itself together. And she understood in the way that you understand things in the middle of magic that what was being built here was not a contract or an agreement but a relationship, something alive. Something that would grow. Harry made a sound beside her. Not pain, something startled and involuntary, the sound of something changing in a way that surprised him. Then the light exploded. It wasn't dangerous. It was simply large. It shot outward from the circle in a wave that passed through the walls without damaging them, and the candles blazed twice their height, and the chalk on the floor ignited and burned clean away, and Daphne felt the magic of Greengrass Manor, all of it, every layer of protection and history and love that had been pressed into the stone over 400 years, turn its attention to Harry Potter and say, "You are ours." You belong here. You are safe. Harry was breathing hard. She looked at him. He had his hand pressed flat against his chest, over his sternum, the same gesture she'd made on Tuesday when the pull started, and his eyes were wide and very bright, and she realized, with a startling lack of warning, that he was trying not to cry. He didn't cry. He was Harry Potter and he had learned, in 8 years of a cupboard under the stairs, to hold everything in very tight and very still. But his jaw worked, and his free hand closed into a fist at his side, and the not crying was the most present she'd felt him be since the garden. Daphne said nothing. She was her mother's daughter, which meant she knew when nothing was exactly the right thing to say. After a moment, he lowered his hand. He was very careful about it, returning to the surface, the way she imagined a diver returning to the surface of water, controlled, deliberate. I felt it, he said quietly. In the house. In the walls. It knows me now. Yes, her father said, and his voice was different. Not professional. Warm, in the way it was with her and Astoria, and she watched Harry notice this and not know what to do with it. It knows you. You're part of the manor now, Harry. The wards will respond to you. The house will keep you. Harry nodded. Looked at the floor where the chalk had been. Back up. Thank you, he said. And that was also not quite enough to hold everything it was trying to hold, but it was what he had, and everyone in the room understood that. That night, Daphne woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of something happening downstairs. Not a sound she could describe exactly, more a sensation, a flicker through the new bond she carried, something electric and uncontrolled. She was out of bed before she was fully awake, bare feet on stone, moving down the corridor to Harry's room. His door was open. He wasn't in his bed. She followed the feeling down the stairs and out through the back of the house, and found him in the garden. He was standing in the middle of the lawn in the moonlight, barefoot in 2 big pajamas, and the air around him was doing something extraordinary. The grass in a 3-foot radius around his feet was flattened as if by a pressure pressing outward from him. The leaves on the nearby tree, Astoria's climbable tree, were trembling without wind. And his hands, hanging at his sides, had a faint golden-green light moving across them, the same color as the accord light, crackling and shifting like something trying to find its shape. He was asleep. Daphne stopped at the edge of the garden path and watched. The magic was wild, chaotic in the specific way that magic was chaotic when it had been compressed for a very long time and was now, suddenly, given room. It poured off him in irregular pulses, lifting his untidy hair, making the air taste the way it tasted before a thunderstorm, and the more she watched the more she understood that what she was seeing was years of suppression suddenly having an exit. The accord had opened something in him. She should probably go and get her mother. She took 1 step back toward the house, and then stopped, because Harry made a sound, small, rough, not quite distress and not quite its opposite, and the light around his hands spiked sharply, the grass flattening further, and she had the sudden certain feeling that if she left him alone right now it was going to get very loud very quickly. She walked into the garden. The magic pressed against her when she got close, not hostile, not dangerous to her, specifically, which made sense given what they'd just done, but big and hot and overwhelming, like standing too close to a fire. She kept walking until she was in front of him, 2 feet away, and then she did something she'd seen her mother do with Astoria when her little sister was having a bad dream. She said his name. Just that. Harry. The magic pulsed once, hard. The light on his hands flared bright enough that she had to squint. Then it began to settle. Harry, she said again, quietly. He woke up. His eyes opened, actually opened, startled and wide, the green of them catching the moonlight, and the magic didn't stop but it softened, pulling back toward him, and the grass around his feet began to spring back up, and the leaves on the tree went still. He looked at his hands. Looked at the grass. Looked at her. What did I, accidental magic, she said. Fairly impressive accidental magic, but nothing's broken. He flexed his fingers, watching the last of the light fade. "I was dreaming," he said. "I was dreaming about," he stopped. She waited. "The cupboard," he said. Flat. Not asking for sympathy, just reporting it. "Your magic was trying to get out," she said. The accord unsealed something. "It's going to take some time to settle. It'll be, more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now." Chapter 2, The Education of Harry James Potter. The first time Harry Potter produced a controlled spell without a wand, he shattered every window on the east wing of Greengrass Manor. It was a Wednesday morning in late August, 11 months after the accord, and Cyrus Greengrass was standing in the practice courtyard watching with the expression of a man recalibrating a series of assumptions he'd held with reasonable confidence until approximately 30 seconds ago. Daphne was beside him. She had her arms crossed and was doing a very creditable job of not looking smug, because she'd told her father 3 weeks ago that Harry's wandless control was advancing faster than anything she'd read in the family library, and her father had said, "The library accounts for most exceptional cases, Daphne," in the tone he used when he thought she was extrapolating beyond her evidence. The east wing windows continued to not exist. "That," Harry said from across the courtyard, looking at the empty window frames with wide eyes, "was not what I was trying to do." "What were you trying to do?" Cyrus asked. "Open one window. The one in the study." Cyrus looked at the 11 empty frames. "You have excellent range," he said. Daphne uncrossed her arms. "I told you." Her father gave her a sideways look. "You did," he acknowledged, and while it wasn't an apology it was the closest thing to one that Cyrus Greengrass produced in regular circulation, and she took it accordingly. Harry had come to the manor that summer morning 11 months ago with a shoebox and a borrowed pair of trainers and magic so compressed by years of punishment and neglect that it had been essentially invisible, which was why, Serena had explained in her careful way, Dumbledore hadn't worried over much. The monitoring charms on underage magic measured expression, not capacity. If you trained a child to never express it, the charms read quiet and the old man slept easy. What the charms hadn't measured, and what no one had bothered to investigate, was what happened when that compression was released. The first 3 months had been, not chaotic, exactly, but energetic. Harry's accidental magic had spiked regularly in the nights, settling as his subconscious processed both the new safety and the old wounds, and twice the manor wards had activated in the small hours of the morning because the surge of raw magic from the east bedroom had registered as a potential attack. The second time that happened, Cyrus had simply moved Harry's bedroom to the room directly below the family's main ward anchor, which meant the wards could absorb the excess rather than flag it, and after that the nights were quieter. But the days were something else. Harry learned fast. That was the first thing, and the most important thing, and it ran underneath everything else like bedrock. He didn't learn in the showy, dramatic way of someone performing intelligence. He learned in the relentless, methodical way of someone who had spent years with nothing but time and books and his own mind, and who had been waiting, without knowing he was waiting, for someone to give him material worth learning. Cyrus had started him on theory. Pure magical theory, the kind that most families with old libraries taught their children before they were old enough for a wand, the nature of intent, the mechanics of will to magic translation, the difference between instinctive casting and structured casting. Harry had consumed it with the focused intensity of someone starving and had been asking Cyrus pointed questions within the first week that made his father quietly relocate several of the more advanced volumes to within Harry's reach. Serena had started him on something more unusual, the Greengrass family tradition of feeling magic before directing it. It was less formal than theory, more difficult to explain, essentially the practice of learning to sense the magical environment around you the way you might learn to listen, not for any specific thing but for everything, developing a sensitivity that most witches and wizards never had because they went to Hogwarts, picked up a wand, and learned to direct without ever learning to receive. Harry had a natural aptitude for it that was frankly alarming. Within 2 months he could feel the manor wards. Within 4 he could feel the magical signatures of everyone in the house. Within 6, Serena had come to find Daphne in the library with an expression Daphne had never seen on her mother's face, which was something adjacent to awe. He felt the wards around Malfoy Manor, Serena had said. We were in Wiltshire for the midsummer gathering. He asked me if the family in the estate to the north had angry magic. Malfoy Manor is 3 miles from the gathering site, Daphne had said. Yes, her mother had said. Daphne had gone back to her book. But she'd been aware, in a way she'd filed carefully away for later examination, that the thing in her chest, the accord bond, had given a particular warm pulse at her mother's words, the same pulse it gave when something happened that it considered significant. Now she watched Harry look at the empty window frames with the focused, analytical expression he'd developed over the last year, which was different from the careful animal blankness he'd arrived with. That blankness had mostly faded. What replaced it was something more settled, not soft, not unguarded, but present. He was here now, not always braced for exit. The intent was too broad, Harry said, thinking aloud. He did this with her father, had started doing it early, working through problems verbally in a way he almost never did with anyone else. I was thinking open rather than thinking about that specific window. The magic didn't have enough of a target. And the power behind it? Cyrus asked. Harry looked at his hands. I got frustrated. I'd been trying for 20 minutes and nothing was happening and he stopped. A flicker of something old and habitual, frustration at himself, she recognized it, moved across his face. I pushed instead of directing. Result? Her father prompted. 11 windows, Daphne said. 9, Harry said. 2 of those were already cracked. I'm aware, Cyrus said. He sounded almost amused, which was a register he deployed rarely and therefore effectively. Again. 1 window. The study. Harry looked at the remaining windows with visible focus. Daphne watched him settle himself. She'd watched him do this hundreds of times in the past year, the small physical process of bringing himself inward, away from distraction and self-consciousness, until the only thing in his awareness was the task. He breathed out slowly. His hands dropped to his sides. The study window opened. Just the study window. Smooth, unhurried, as if a hand had turned the latch from the inside. Cyrus looked at it for a long moment. There we are, he said. Harry breathed out a second time, this one purely relief, and Daphne felt the bond register a warm flicker. She'd been feeling his emotional states through it for months, not with enough precision to read specific thoughts, more like the magical equivalent of a barometric pressure reading, broad emotional weather rather than specific forecast. Right now it was reading quiet satisfaction with a texture of exhaustion underneath it. Good, she said. He looked at her. You could just say well done. I could, she agreed. Good is more accurate. Well done implies the difficulty was average. He stared at her for a moment. You're genuinely the most annoying person I've ever met. You said that in October too. It keeps being true. Her father coughed something that was definitely not a laugh and walked toward the house, which left them alone in the courtyard in the way that Cyrus Greengrass occasionally contrived, not obviously, he was too subtle for obvious, but Daphne had noticed the pattern. Her father believed that the bond between her and Harry needed room to develop naturally, and his method of providing that room was strategic withdrawal. Harry dropped onto the low stone wall at the edge of the courtyard, which had become his habitual spot for post-practice analysis. Daphne sat beside him. The August morning was warm and still, the kind of stillness that preceded the particular heavy heat of late summer afternoons, and the garden beyond the practice court was full of the smell of lavender and the sounds of bees working through it. Are you all right? She asked. The question was routine. She asked it after every heavy practice session, not as a social form but because she actually wanted to know, and because Harry had a well-developed habit of saying fine to end conversations rather than fine as an accurate report of his state. Tired, he said. The long casting depletes something. He paused. Like a muscle. It is a muscle, she said. Magic has stamina the same way the body does. Father says most witches and wizards never notice because they're working with a wand and the wand handles most of the load. Wandless you feel everything. I know. He said. He was quiet for a moment. Daphne. Hogwarts is in 2 weeks. I know when Hogwarts is. I mean, what happens when we get there? We've been, he gestured between them, at the house, vaguely encompassing the last 11 months. Here. Here has rules I understand. Hogwarts has different rules. She looked at him. He was looking at the lavender, not at her, which was how he addressed things he found difficult to say directly. She'd catalogued this tendency around month 4 and stopped trying to force eye contact during important conversations. Harry said things to the middle distance that he couldn't say to a face, and the middle distance was always close enough to the same as a face. What rules are you worried about? She asked. They're going to sort us, he said. We might end up in different houses. Almost certainly will, she said. That made him look at her. You're not worried about it? No. Why? She thought about it. Outside and visible rather than filed away for later, she made herself do that with Harry, because he found her internal processing frustrating, and because it had occurred to her around month 6 that filing everything away for later was not always the same as actually thinking it through. Because we're not the same kind of people, she said. We're not supposed to be. If we were sorted together it would mean we were interchangeable, and we're not. She paused. The house is a category. We're not categories. He looked at the lavender again. The wizarding world has very strong feelings about certain categories, he said carefully. I know. Slytherin and Gryffindor specifically. I know. And you think it doesn't matter? I think it matters to people who need sorting to tell them who to trust, she said. We already know who we trust. The sorting is afterward. The bond registered something warm and layered, the particular quality she'd come to associate with Harry finding his way to reassurance through the specific path of logic rather than sentiment. He was, at the bottom of it, someone who trusted arguments more than feelings, not because he didn't have feelings but because the feelings had been weaponized against him often enough that he'd learned to double-check them with his head. All right, he said. And, she added, because she'd been holding this back for a week and this seemed like the appropriate time, if anyone at Hogwarts has a problem with where either of us is sorted, or with the accord, or with any aspect of your existence, they will find that we are significantly less polite about it than we have been in private. He blinked. We haven't been polite in private. Exactly, she said, and he laughed, the real one, the one that arrived without warning and without armor, the one she'd first heard on that Tuesday in the garden when she'd pointed out that the staircase was an unlikely bruising agent. She had catalogued that laugh too. In the private, unfiled part of her mind where she kept the things she wasn't examining too closely yet. 3 days before the Hogwarts letters arrived, Albus Dumbledore came to Greengrass Manor. Daphne was in the library when she felt the ward's signature, a visitor at the main gate, unknown but magically significant, carrying the kind of layered magical complexity that meant either an extremely powerful witch or wizard or someone carrying several magical objects of high potency, or, she supposed, both. She was beside Harry before she'd made a conscious decision to move, which was something the bond did occasionally. Urgent situations bypassed the deliberation step and went straight to action. Harry was in the practice court again, this time with a wand, a temporary practice wand her father had sourced, since Harry's actual wand would wait until Ollivander's, working on something with focused intensity that meant he was annoyed at himself about something. He'd heard the wards too. He was already looking at the gate. Who? He said. Someone powerful. Carrying a lot. She felt the signature more carefully. Something layered and ancient and slightly familiar from the history books, from her father's stories, from the feeling of magic that had been accumulating in one person for a very long time. Dumbledore, she said. Harry went still. Not the old blankness, something sharper, more alert. He'd been waiting for this, in some sense, for 11 months. They all had. "How do you want to play it?" she asked. He looked at her with something that might have been a flash of surprise, that she'd asked, that she'd made it his decision. He was still occasionally surprised by that, by the Greengrass household's general operating principle of treating him as someone with valid opinions rather than someone to be managed. Then the surprise settled into thought. "Honestly," he said. "I'm not interested in performing." "Good." Her father met Dumbledore at the door. Daphne and Harry came in from the practice court, still in training clothes, Harry with the practice wand tucked in his belt. Serena was already in the entrance hall, which meant she'd felt the ward's signature too and had staged herself accordingly. Her mother was not a woman who was caught off guard, she arranged herself relative to events with a precision that looked effortless and wasn't. Dumbledore was, older than Daphne had expected, and stranger. The portraits in the history books showed him as imposing. In person he was still imposing but also remarkably human, which was harder to square with the legend. He wore deep blue robes, half-moon glasses over very blue eyes, and he carried his own magical atmosphere the way some very old powerful things did, like a slight pressure in the air, a sense of depth, as though the space around him was somehow more than it looked. He saw Harry immediately. His eyes went to him with the particular controlled directness of someone who had been not looking at something deliberately and then stopped not looking. "Harry," he said, and his voice was warm and genuine, which made it harder rather than easier, Daphne thought. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. He didn't move toward him. He stood where he was, at Daphne's shoulder, and his voice was perfectly civil. No hostility. No performance of warmth either. Something shifted behind Dumbledore's eyes. He had clearly been prepared for some version of this, the runaway charge found and changed, the expected reunion, but Harry's tone was something he was recalibrating against. He looked at the practice wand. He looked at the courtyard doors, still open. He looked at Cyrus Greengrass with the expression of a man who had many things he wanted to say and was choosing between them carefully. "Cyrus," he said. "You might have contacted me." "I contacted the relevant ministry office," Cyrus said pleasantly. All appropriate paperwork for the accord was filed within 72 hours. The response indicated the matter was reviewed and no objections were raised at that time. A pause, precise and deliberate. "Is there a problem with the ministry's assessment, Albus?" "The concern," Dumbledore said, and his voice was careful now in the way of someone picking their way across uncertain ground, "is not procedural. Harry's protection, the blood wards, were specifically keyed to Petunia's household. Moving him breaks those protections." "With respect," Serena said, "those protections were largely theoretical by the time we invoked the accord. The emotional component required to sustain blood-based protective magic was not present in that household. What was protecting Harry was primarily the ward framework, and ward frameworks can be replicated and improved upon." A pause. "Which we have done." Dumbledore looked at her. Then at Harry. "How are you, my boy?" And there it was, the warmth, genuine and complicated and slightly manipulative without meaning to be, the warmth of someone who cared about Harry as a concept and a piece of a larger plan as well as a person, and who didn't necessarily distinguish between those things clearly enough. Daphne watched Harry hear it and sort it. "I'm well," Harry said. "Thank you." "I should have," Dumbledore stopped. Unusual, in a man who seemed to navigate language with complete confidence. "I made a decision about your placement that I believed was correct, based on information about your mother's sacrifice and the nature of the magic it created. I still believe the fundamental theory was sound." He looked at Harry directly. "But the execution was, I did not verify conditions sufficiently. That was my error, and I'm sorry for it." The hall was very quiet. Harry considered this for a moment. Daphne watched him, the way he weighed the apology, the way he tested it for sincerity rather than strategy, the way he decided. "Thank you," he said again, and it meant something slightly different this time. Not warmth, exactly. Harry moved toward warmth slowly and with intent, but acknowledgement. The apology had been genuine enough to deserve acknowledgement. However, Harry continued, and Daphne's mouth wanted to do something at the however, I won't be returning to Privet Drive. The accord is done. The Greengrasses are my family now. He said it simply, without aggression, without needing Dumbledore to agree. This is the fact. And whatever you need me to do, whatever the prophecy needs, I'm happy to discuss it properly when I'm old enough to be in the discussion. Until then, I'd appreciate not being managed. The silence returned. Longer this time. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter, this boy who had arrived at the manor 11 months ago in oversized clothes with a shoebox, and who was standing in the entrance hall of an old magical family home in training clothes with a practice wand in his belt, and the Greengrass family magic settled in the bones of him like something that had always been there, and his expression went through something complicated that resolved, eventually, into a form of wonder. Quite, he said softly. I can see you've been, well educated. Very, Harry said. Diagon Alley was the first time Harry had been back in the wizarding world in any public sense since the Accord, and he approached it with the particular balanced attention he brought to any new environment, head up, taking everything in, not quite casual and not quite alert, somewhere between the two. Daphne walked beside him. Her mother was ahead with Astoria, who had been promised new books and was therefore operating at a level of barely contained enthusiasm that made even the crowded alley feel slightly small. Her father was handling the Gringotts business. Harry had his own vault, she'd learned, had had one since his parents died, and Cyrus had been quietly managing the approach to ensure the transition was handled with appropriate dignity rather than the institutional indifference Gringotts sometimes deployed toward orphaned accounts. Harry stopped outside Ollivander's. She stopped with him. He was looking at the shop window, the single wand displayed on a faded purple cushion, the dust-thick glass, with an expression she didn't recognize immediately and then did, the same expression he'd had when he first walked through the manor door. A door he'd given up believing in. Ready? She asked. No, he said honestly. Yes. He pushed the door open. Ollivander's was famously strange. The shop had the atmospheric quality of a place that existed slightly outside normal time, and the man himself materialized from the dimness with the soundlessness of someone who had been moving through small spaces for centuries and had long since perfected the art. Mr. Potter, Garrick Ollivander said, his pale eyes landing on Harry with the sharpness of someone seeing a specific fact confirmed. I wondered when, but never if. He looked at Harry with an intensity that was professional and personal at once. Your father, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable. Excellent for transfiguration. And your mother, willow, 10 1/4, swishy. Wonderful for charms work. He tilted his head. I remember every wand I've ever sold. So I've heard, Harry said. But you are not here for memories. He moved into the stacks with the ease of long habit. Hold out your wand hand. What followed was, in Daphne's estimation, fascinating. She'd had her own Ollivander session the previous year, Holly and Dragon Heartstring, 9 inches, surprisingly springy, and hers had been relatively quick, 6 or 7 wands, the right one found within 20 minutes. Harry's took 45 minutes, 23 wands, and a progression through increasingly baffled expressions on Ollivander's face that told its own story. The 23rd wand was 11 inches, Holly, phoenix feather. When Harry's fingers closed around it, Daphne felt something through the bond, not an emotion exactly, more like a resonance, like two things that had been slightly out of tune finding their key. The wand threw gold and red sparks from its tip, and Harry stared at it with the expression of someone who just heard music they'd been humming without knowing the source. Ollivander was looking at the wand with those sharp pale eyes. Curious, he said, mostly to himself. Then to Harry, curious indeed. The phoenix who gave that feather gave only one other. Its brother feather is in the wand that gave you that scar. Harry met the old wand maker's gaze. I know, he said. You know? Ollivander sounded genuinely surprised. Daphne's father told me. He glanced at her briefly. I've had time to prepare myself for the idea. Ollivander regarded him for a moment longer. You are not what I expected, Mr. Potter. I'm getting that a lot lately, Harry said, and tucked the wand into his belt beside the practice wand, and walked out of the shop into the alley. Platform 9 3/4 was chaos organized by tradition into something that looked like order from far enough away. Owls, cats, rats, trunks, children in varying states of first-year excitement and seventh-year exhaustion, the whole thing poured through the barrier in a continuous stream with the practice stampede quality of an annual event. Daphne's trunk was handled. Her cat, a grey half-Persian named Arrhythmus whom Harry had described as deeply judgmental, which makes sense given the name, was in his carrier. She'd said goodbye to her parents with the composed efficiency of someone who didn't intend to cry at a train station because that wasn't a productive use of the available time, and had then had to forcibly prevent herself from crying at the sight of Astoria's face when Harry hugged her goodbye, because Astoria had grabbed him around the middle and said into his shirt, "You'd better write. Daphne's handwriting is terrible and I want to know what it's all like," and Harry had said, "I will. I promise," with the quiet sincerity of someone for whom promises were not casual currency. Now they were on the train, settled in a compartment midway down, trunks overhead, Arrhythmus sulking in his carrier, the platform disappearing behind them as the Hogwarts Express gathered speed into the countryside. Harry was looking out the window. The landscape was moving past in long summer gold sweeps, Wiltshire giving way to open countryside, and his face had the middle-distance look he wore when he was thinking about something he hadn't decided how to say yet. "Nervous?" she asked. "No," he said. Then, after a pause, a little. "Not about Hogwarts. About," he considered. "About who I'm supposed to be there. The wizarding world has ideas." "The wizarding world has a lot of ideas," she agreed. "Most of them are wrong. They're going to want the savior narrative," he said. "The boy who lived. The modest, uncertain, overwhelmed first year who needs guidance and doesn't know what he's doing." He said it without particular bitterness, just noting the shape of a thing. "That's the role they've written." She looked at him. And I'm not that." He said it simply, the way he'd said it to Dumbledore, not as a declaration, just as a fact. "This is what's true. I don't know if that's going to cause problems or just confusion." "Probably both," she said. "Causing confusion in people who are expecting to manage you is almost always going to cause problems eventually." "Encouraging." "I wasn't trying to be encouraging. I was being accurate." The compartment door opened and she knew before she looked, she'd been sensing his magical signature for an hour, moving through the train with the particular directed confidence of someone who had planned this walk, that it was Draco Malfoy. He was exactly what she'd expected from knowing his family, blonde, pale, expensive, performing a ease that sat just slightly wrong on someone his age, the performance of a boy who had been told what confidence looked like and was executing the definition rather than the thing. He had two large boys behind him, already seeming to function as extensions of his presence rather than their own people. His eyes went to Harry first. Then to her. His expression did something complicated. "Daphne Greengrass," he said. Not unfriendly. They'd met at wizarding social functions. The Malfoys and the Greengrasses occupied adjacent spaces in the pure-blood social world, close enough to require civility, distinct enough to not be allies. "I didn't know you were traveling together." "Didn't you?" she said, pleasantly. He turned to Harry. She watched him do what she recognized as the Malfoy version of extending an olive branch, which was a process that required the other person to accept the terms rather than actually engage with them. "Harry Potter," he said, with the ease of someone who had practiced this. "I've been hoping to meet you. I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." Harry looked at him. Not with hostility, not with performance, just looked at him, the same level, assessing attention he brought to everything. "Harry Potter," he said. Draco extended his hand. It was a gracious gesture and also a slightly calculated one, the kind that, if refused, immediately cast the refuser as the unreasonable party. Harry shook it. No hesitation, no ceremony. Just a handshake. I could show you around the train, Draco offered. It can be confusing for people who aren't familiar with, he caught himself, apparently recalibrating whatever information he'd been working from. Because Harry didn't look confused. Harry looked like someone who'd read the train's floor plan and already knew where everything was. Anyway. The wizarding world, he finished, less smoothly. I appreciate it, Harry said. We're all right, though. Draco looked at Daphne. There was something in his face that she filed away, not hostility, something more uncertain than that. He'd come here with a plan and the plan had met a reality that didn't quite fit the plan, and he was smart enough to know it. If you want good company at school, he said, recovering, you should be careful which side you choose. Some families are better alliances than others. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then, I'll keep that in mind. Draco held his gaze for one more beat, then turned and left with his companions, the door sliding closed behind him. Daphne let out a slow breath. He's more intelligent than he wants to be, she said. Harry looked at her. What does that mean? It means he's been given a role the same way you have, and unlike you, he hasn't figured out yet that the role is a cage. She paused. He will, eventually. The question is whether he figures it out early enough to matter. Harry considered this. You're sympathetic to him. I'm analytical about him, she said. It's different. She looked at the window, at the countryside rolling past. His father is the one who worries me. Lucius. Father said he's on the Hogwarts Board of Governors. And the Wisengamot. And approximately 14 other things. She turned back to Harry. Lucius Malfoy is not going to like you. Not the you that you actually are, specifically. He built significant power on the assumption that the wizarding world would remain the shape it was when Voldemort. Don't flinch, I'm not flinching. Your shoulder moved. That was unrelated. When Voldemort was a present and organizing force, she continued without breaking stride, and Dumbledore's influence is the only thing keeping certain political ambitions in check. You being manageable and overwhelmed and dependent on institutional guidance keeps the balance. You being, she gestured at him with the comprehensive sweep she used when words were inefficient. What you are, disrupts that. Harry was quiet for a moment. So I'm a problem for both sides. You're a problem for anyone who needs you to be something other than what you are, she said. Welcome to having actual agency. He looked at her for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. You've been saving that speech. 3 days, she admitted. Was it good? It was extremely good, she said, with the particular composure of someone who had no problem acknowledging their own quality, and you know it. The countryside outside went gold and green and then began to tip toward the purple of the Scottish hills in the distance, and the train carried them north toward something that was going to be, in all probability, significantly more complicated than either of them was fully prepared for. They were both, in their different ways, looking forward to it. Chapter 3, The Sorting of Storms. The boats were Daphne's favorite part. She wouldn't admit this to Harry, because Harry had absorbed enough of her family's aesthetic sensibility to deploy it against her. She could already hear him saying, "You have feelings about boats, Daphne, that's very human of you," in the flat, delighted tone he developed specifically for moments when she showed any evidence of sentiment. So she kept it to herself, the way the lake sat black and enormous around them, the castle burning above its own reflection, the whole thing so aggressively beautiful that even the boy sitting 3 inches from her who'd spent 2 years learning to read magical environments with inhuman precision had gone silent. She'd been watching him since they crossed onto the water. His face had done the door thing, that involuntary, helpless opening, and he'd turned it away from her almost immediately, which she allowed, because Harry's moments of genuine wonder were private in the way that some things were private, not secret but not for sharing, and she'd learned the difference. The boy across the boat from them was still talking. Ron Weasley. She'd sorted him into a category during the train ride, when he'd materialized in their compartment doorway 40 minutes out of London with a smudge of something on his nose and the specific energy of someone who'd been moving through carriages looking for something interesting. He was loud in the uncomplicated way of large families, not performing loudness, just genuinely accustomed to having to be heard over several people at once. He'd looked at Harry with the immediate recognition of every Wizarding World child and then looked at Daphne with the slightly suspicious wariness of a Gryffindor-coded person encountering someone he couldn't immediately categorize. He was, Daphne had decided, essentially well-intentioned and completely unsubtle, which were qualities she had limited personal use for but which she could acknowledge as genuinely useful in certain contexts. "It's enormous," Ron said now, craning at the castle. Fred and George described it but they always, you know, brothers, they say things to be annoying. He was talking to Harry specifically, with the easy familiarity of someone who had decided they were friends and was waiting for the other party to catch up. "Is this your first time seeing it?" "Yes," Harry said, still looking up. "Mine too." "Obviously." Ron paused. "Percy, that's my brother, he's a prefect, insufferable about it. Percy says the ceiling in the Great Hall reflects the sky outside." "Enchanted." "It does," Daphne said. "There's a chapter on the Hogwarts structural enchantments in Hogwarts, a history. The ceiling is technically just an illusion cast on the stone. The charm was laid in by Rowena Ravenclaw in the 10th century and hasn't needed renewal since." Ron looked at her. "You've read Hogwarts, a history?" "I've read most things," she said. There was a pause while he processed this. Then he turned back to Harry with the slightly baffled expression of someone storing an encounter away for later. "She's like this all the time," he said, apparently deciding this was a Harry question. "More or less," Harry said. "Impressive," Ron said, with what seemed like genuine respect, which revised Daphne's assessment of him upward by a modest increment. The boats hit the rocky bank. They were herded by the enormous figure of Rubeus Hagrid, the school's gamekeeper, whom Harry had read about and who was, in person, even more dramatic a physical presence than the description suggested, up a stone path and through great oak doors into the entrance hall. It was the magic of the castle that hit Daphne first. Old. Genuinely old, not old in the decorative sense but in the structural sense, layer upon layer of enchantment, centuries of students and spells and lives, the whole castle breathing with accumulated magical energy the way old stone breathed cold. She felt Harry feel it beside her. Their shoulders were touching and she could feel through the contact and the bond both the way his awareness expanded to take it in, reaching outward the way it did when he was reading a new magical environment. "It's loud," he murmured, "too quiet for anyone else." "In a good way," she murmured back. "In a good way," he agreed. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall with the particular formidable quality of someone who had herded 11-year-olds for several decades and had evolved beyond intimidation into simple absolute authority. She explained about the houses. Daphne listened, though she knew the structure by memory. She watched Harry listen, standing very straight, the holly wand in his new robes, his sellotaped glasses finally replaced by a new pair her mother had insisted on in Diagon Alley. He looked, she thought, the way he was supposed to look. Not the imagined boy who lived, not the modest uncertain overwhelmed first year, but this. Present. Prepared. Ready. She felt something through the bond that she recognized as the same thing, reflected back, that he was looking at her and thinking something comparable. She faced forward and did not allow her expression to do anything about that. The Great Hall was everything the books described and also completely beyond what the books described, the way all genuinely extraordinary places were. The description captured the facts and missed the feeling entirely. The ceiling was dark and scattered with stars, the 4 long house tables blazing with candlelight, the hundreds of older students turning to look at the line of first-years processing down the central aisle with the collective attention of an audience that had done this before and was mildly invested in the casting. Daphne walked straight. She did not look at the Slytherin table to the right or the Gryffindor table to the left. She was aware of Harry 2 places behind her in the line. They'd arranged themselves alphabetically, which meant Granger was between them, the girl who'd been correcting people's pronunciation on the train, and she was aware of the Bond carrying a low, steady, alert signal. The Sorting Hat sat on a 4-legged stool. Ancient, battered, comfortably ugly. It opened its brim and sang. The song was, as promised, informative. Daphne noted the qualities it described for each house with the analytic attention she brought to all new information, filed the relevant parts, and waited. Her name was called 5th. She sat on the stool. The hat dropped over her eyes and the great hall disappeared. Greengrass, the hat said, in a voice that was entirely internal, dry and amused. Yes, I remember your sister. I remember your father. I remember everyone. You know where you're going. Do I? She said, which was not quite a question. You're not here to negotiate. You're here because the form requires it. A pause. You have the Accord bond. Interesting. I haven't felt one of those in a long time. Where does the bond go? I can only place you. Not him. He hasn't sat down yet. Another pause. You're curious about that. Whether you'll be separated. I'm curious about how the separation will affect the bond. It's a practical question. The hat sounded like it was smiling, if hats could smile. You're not afraid of the separation. I told him it wouldn't matter. And you believed it? Yes. Good, the hat said. And then, aloud, to the hall, Slytherin. The Slytherin table erupted. She lifted the hat from her head and walked, composed and unhurried, to join them, green and silver banners, older students applauding, a spot opening for her near the middle. She sat down and turned to face the stool. She watched the names. Watched Hermione Granger disappear under the hat and emerge, after a pause that the hat seemed to find satisfying, into Gryffindor. Watched Neville Longbottom, visibly terrified, sit down and have an unexpectedly long conversation with the hat before being sorted into Gryffindor with a kind of stunned relief. Watched Ron Weasley, who didn't even get to sit all the way down before the hat shouted Gryffindor. Then, Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not the ordinary between names quiet but something qualitatively different, a collective held breath, the sound of 500 people suddenly paying absolute attention to a single point. Harry walked to the stool. He walked to it the way he walked everywhere, straight, unhurried, with the particular quality of someone who had decided that the opinion of the room was interesting data rather than a verdict, and he sat down, and the hat dropped over his eyes. The silence stretched. 30 seconds. A minute. Daphne watched the hat with the composure of someone who had placed a bet she was confident in and was waiting for the outcome. The Slytherin table around her was murmuring. She caught snatches. Gryffindor, obviously. Salazar, wouldn't that be something? His father was Gryffindor, with the detached interest of someone overhearing commentary on a match they already know the result of. She didn't, actually, know the result. She had opinions. But she'd told Harry what she'd told him, that the house was a category, not a definition, and she meant it, and whatever the hat said, she meant that too. The hat's brim opened. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table detonated. The twins, she could see Fred and George Weasley, she'd met them at a Quidditch event the previous summer, actually stood up. The cheering was enormous and somewhat unhinged. Harry lifted the hat from his head. He stood up. And as he turned to walk toward the Gryffindor table, he looked across the hall directly at her. She raised an eyebrow. He raised one back. A perfect mirror, which he'd spent approximately 3 months learning to do specifically because she did it, and now deployed it against her on an irregular basis to excellent effect. She looked away before she did something embarrassing with her expression, and heard Pansy Parkinson next to her saying, "Of course he's a Gryffindor, they're all the same," and filed the comment away under things that are wrong in interesting ways and watched Harry Potter take his seat among the red and gold. She found him after the feast in the entrance hall, which they'd agreed on 2 weeks ago, a meeting point that was neither Gryffindor territory nor Slytherin territory, neutral ground in the way that places between places always were. He was already there when she arrived, which meant he'd made his excuses quickly, and he had a bread roll in his hand because Harry had a practical relationship with available food that was a direct and comprehensible result of his first 9 years. "Well," she said. "Gryffindor," he said. "I noticed." The hat was very certain about it. He took a bite of the roll. It barely paused. It paused longer on you than on most. That was it, deciding how to phrase things, not deciding the house. He paused. It mentioned the accord. "Mine too." They looked at each other. Around them, the post-feast movement of students was beginning, the prefects calling their houses, the crowd sorting itself into its respective rivers. They stood in the middle of it like two rocks in a stream. "How's Slytherin?" he asked. "Cold. Ambitious. Pansy Parkinson has already tried to organize a social hierarchy. Blaise Zabini is watching everyone with the expression of someone who finds the whole thing mildly beneath him but isn't leaving." She paused. "Draco Malfoy is in my house." Harry's expression did something specific. "How does that feel?" "Like a variable I'll have to manage carefully." She looked at him. "Gryffindor?" The Weasley twins tried to shake my hand simultaneously as a form of intimidation. "Ron is in my year and seems to have decided we're best friends, which I think he decided on the train and is now executing as a fait accompli." He paused. "There's a girl, Hermione Granger. She has the most organized notes I've ever seen. She's also the most aggressively correct person I've ever encountered, which I say as someone who has spent 2 years being corrected by you. That's not correcting, that's informing. That's what Hermione Granger also says." Daphne allowed herself a small precise smile. "I think I'd like her." "I thought you might." He finished the bread roll. "Daphne." The hall, when my name was called. The whole room went, "Yes." "I don't like it." "The attention?" "The expectation in the attention," he said. "It's not curious. It's waiting. Like they're waiting to see if I'm going to perform the thing they've been promised." She thought about this carefully, because it was an observation that deserved care rather than quick comfort. "You're right," she said. "They are waiting for that. And when you don't deliver it, when you continue being what you are, some of them are going to find that threatening. Some of them already do." "Who?" He looked across the entrance hall to where the Slytherin students were filtering toward the dungeon staircase. She followed his gaze. Draco Malfoy was moving with his group, but he was looking back, not at Harry, specifically, but at the two of them standing together in the entrance hall, Gryffindor and Slytherin, and his face was doing that complicated recalculating thing again. "Not him," Harry said. "Not yet." "His father." She looked at him. "You felt Lucius Malfoy?" "He was at the feast. Staff table, visitor's chair, the one reserved for governors. He was watching me the whole time." Harry looked at his empty hand where the bread roll had been. "And he was watching you. Because of the accord." "Because of what the accord means," Harry said. "You and me being two different things that the world expects to be opposed, and not being opposed." He paused. He sat with Dumbledore for most of the second course. Daphne went still. "That's interesting." "I thought so. Two people who both, for different reasons, need you to be something other than what you are. Sitting next to each other," he said. I'm sure it's coincidental. Harry said, which was the exact tone her father used when he meant I'm sure it isn't. She made a mental note to write to her father in the morning. Then, we should go. Prefects will start asking questions. Yes. He moved toward the Gryffindor stream. Then stopped, half-turned. Same time tomorrow? Before breakfast. Courtyard near the greenhouses, she said. I checked the map. It's between both common room routes. He looked at her for a moment. You already checked the map. On the train. Of course you did, he said, and the Real laugh came, brief, genuine, appearing and disappearing like a spark, and then he was gone into the red and gold current, and she turned toward the green and silver, and the bond between them stretched across the distance with the easy, unhurried confidence of something that had no anxiety about length. Professor Snape was a problem. Not an unexpected problem. She'd read about Severus Snape, and her father had said, with the diplomatic neutrality he employed when he was being precise about someone he personally found difficult, that Professor Snape was an exceptional potions master who had complicated feelings about Harry's parentage and a teaching philosophy that some students found challenging. Daphne had translated this as, he is going to be unfair to Harry, and she had been right, and the question was what Harry was going to do about it. She found out on Friday morning in the greenhouse before breakfast. Harry was already there when she arrived, sitting on the stone bench with the particular quality of stillness that meant he was working something through. Not angry, she'd have felt angry through the bond. More like focused. Like he was taking something apart to look at it. Potions yesterday, she said. How did you know? You have the face you had in July when the summoning charm kept sending things into the wall instead of your hand. Problem solving. What did he do? Harry was quiet for a moment. Not reluctant, organizing. He tried to embarrass me in front of the class, he said. Rapid-fire questions, topics we hadn't covered yet, framed as things I should know already. Theatrical disappointment when I didn't answer instantly. A pause. He expected me to freeze or get flustered. What did you do? Answered the ones I knew. He looked at his hands. Which was most of them? She looked at him. Most of them. I'd read ahead. The corner of his mouth moved. He asked about bezoars. The properties of monkshood. The draft of living death. He glanced up. He seemed, I'm not sure if annoyed is the right word. More like recalibrating. He wanted to establish the dynamic early, she said. Potter is underprepared and easily unsettled. It's useful to him, keeps you dependent on his approval. Harry looked at the greenhouse wall. He hated my father. He did. That's not, I don't want to just dismiss it as a grudge. Whatever happened between them was real. He paused. But it's also not my problem. She looked at him with some appreciation. That was the specifically difficult thing, the thing that most people of any age found hard, the ability to hold someone's pain as real and also decline to be governed by it. No, she said. It's not. So I'll keep reading ahead. He stood up, brushing stone dust off his robes. And I'll be excellent in his class, and I'll be perfectly polite, and if he persists in being theatrical about it, he picked up his bag. Then we'll deal with it. She said. You're better at potions than I am, and you've been in Slytherin for 4 days and you already know where Snape's professional vanity lives, he said. Yes, She stood and fell into step beside him. His professional vanity lives in his research, she said as they moved toward the castle. He's published 14 papers in international journals. He considers his potions mastery to be the most legitimate thing about him. She paused. Engage with the work rather than the performance. Cite his research. He'll find it difficult to be dismissive of you if you're clearly engaging with him as a practitioner. Harry was quiet for a moment. He'll know what I'm doing. He'll know, she agreed. He won't be able to help responding to it anyway. Vanity doesn't negotiate with itself. They reached the entrance hall. The breakfast crowd was building, students moving in from all directions, the smell of food and morning and the specific energetic chaos of 700 people starting a school day. Harry's eyes moved through the crowd with the easy situational awareness that had become habitual: exits, potential points of interest, magical signatures worth noting. "Quirrell," he said quietly. She followed his look. Professor Quirrell was moving through the hall toward the staff corridor, head slightly down, the defensive posture of someone who found large groups of people alarming. He was wearing a turban, which Daphne had noted at the feast as unusual and then filed without a hypothesis. "What about him?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "His magical signature is wrong," Harry said. He was watching Quirrell without appearing to watch him, the unfocused gaze that meant he was sensing rather than seeing. "There's something," doubled. Like an echo. She looked at Quirrell. She opened her own awareness the way Serena had taught her, not casting, just receiving, tuning to the ambient magical information the way you'd tune a radio through static. She felt Quirrell's signature. Nervous, scattered, magically present but not particularly, and then underneath it, faint and deeply wrong, a cold dark signature that made the magic of the accord bond flinch. She closed her awareness very deliberately. "Yes," she said. Her voice was entirely steady. "You felt it too?" "Yes." They looked at each other. The breakfast crowd moved around them, 11-year-olds concerned with toast and class schedules and the social architecture of new friendships, and the two of them stood in the middle of it having a silent conversation at speed. "Not yet," Harry said. "We need more information." "Agreed. Tonight." "Library. 3rd floor corridor." "I know where it is," she said. "The door at the end is locked," he said. "I walked past it last night." She looked at him. "You walked to the 3rd floor corridor on your first evening at Hogwarts." "I had some time after the feast and I like to know the layout of places I'm going to live in." He said it with such complete reasonableness that it was briefly impossible to object to. "There's a lock on the door that's a standard Alohomora-resistant charm. Not complicated, but not incidental either. Someone locked that door with intention." She was quiet for a moment. "McGonagall warned us about it at the feast." "Which means whatever's in there, the headmaster wants people to know it exists and is off-limits," Harry said. "Not hidden. Visible but restricted." He paused. "That's a specific choice." "It's bait," she said. He looked at her. "Dumbledore's approach," she said slowly, working it out as she spoke. "He hides things in plain sight and watches who goes to look." She paused. "Or he's using the restricted corridor to protect something, and the warning is genuine, and I'm being overly suspicious." "Both things can be true," Harry said. "We find out what's there. We don't disturb it. We gather information and then we decide what to do with it." He started toward the Gryffindor table. "Library at 7? Don't be late," she said, and split off toward Slytherin without looking back, and heard, at a distance, Ron Weasley greeting Harry with a volume that would have been better suited to an outdoor venue, and filed it under variables that are probably fine. The library after hours had a particular quality: the smell of old books and cold stone, the silence that wasn't quite complete because old books carried a faint presence, centuries of information and the people who'd pressed it into paper. Daphne had her own lamp, her notes, and the particular pleasurable focus she always brought to research that had genuine stakes. Harry had pulled 4 books on Hogwarts history and was cross-referencing them with the focused, slightly unhurried pace of someone who found research genuinely satisfying rather than a means to an end. She'd noticed this about him: for Harry, the information itself was the point, not just its utility. He liked to know things, liked to follow connections, liked the way knowledge arranged itself into patterns. This was, she thought, what happened when you spent your formative years with nothing but books and your own intelligence for company. "Defense," she said, after 20 minutes of companionable quiet. Quirrell teaches defense against the dark arts. Yes. The dark arts are, specifically, his area of professional expertise. Supposedly. Harry looked up from his book. He's not very good at it. He's not, she agreed. I spent Wednesday's class wondering if he'd always been this poor at it, or if something had changed recently. She paused. The magical signature I felt this morning. It's not, I know what you're thinking. I know what we're both thinking. But I want more evidence before I say it out loud. Voldemort, Harry said. She didn't flinch. She'd been working on not flinching. Yes. The signature felt, like what the history books describe. Degraded. Fragmented. Like a magical presence that used to be very much larger than it is now. If he's in Quirrell, Harry closed his book and looked at the ceiling. The stone. She knew immediately what he meant. There had been a break-in at Gringotts in July, reported in the Prophet with the minimum information that Gringotts considered it professionally necessary to share, which was very little, but her father had the kind of contacts who filled gaps. A vault had been emptied, the vault found empty later suggesting the contents had been removed by the vault's owner shortly before the break-in. Nicholas Flamel. The Philosopher's Stone, she said. Flamel's vault was emptied before the break-in, Harry said. Father told me in August. Someone knew the break-in was coming and moved the contents first. Dumbledore. And the third-floor corridor is where he moved it. Harry looked at her. Which means Voldemort being in Quirrell and Quirrell being here is not coincidence. No, she agreed. She gathered her notes, thinking. Harry. We're 11 years old. I know. The headmaster has presumably accounted for this. There are presumably protections in place. Professionally designed, deliberately constructed protections. Yes, Harry said. And Voldemort is in the defense professor. He paused. How are the protections working out so far? She looked at him for a long moment. We tell my father, she said. First thing tomorrow, he agreed. I'll tonight. They packed up in the quiet library, and outside the windows the castle's thousand-year-old magic hummed in the stones, patient and vast and largely unconcerned, and somewhere in the building above them, locked behind a charm that wasn't quite enough, something very old and very dark pressed against its confinement with the unhurried patience of something that believed, with reason, that time was on its side. The thing about Draco Malfoy was that he was not stupid. Daphne had known this before Hogwarts and she knew it more precisely now, 2 weeks in, watching him navigate the Slytherin social architecture with the practiced competence of someone who had been trained for exactly this environment. He managed his alliances efficiently, maintained his status with the particular cold ease of someone who had never not been the dominant social node in a room, and he watched Harry Potter across the Great Hall at mealtimes with an expression she'd learned to read as calculation. He came to find her on a Sunday afternoon in the second week, in the Slytherin common room, with the directness of someone who had decided that performing casualness was a waste of effort with someone as perceptive as Daphne. You and Potter, he said, sitting across from her at the common room table. She looked up from her charms reading. What about us? The accord. He said the word with a precision that meant he'd done his reading. My father explained it to me. And what did your father say? Something crossed Draco's face. Not the practiced easy disdain he used in public, something more honest, something younger. That it was an old magic and the Greengrasses had no right to invoke it for someone already protected by established arrangements. He paused. He was angry. I imagine. He's going to challenge it, Draco said. Not a threat, she could read the difference between Draco performing threat and Draco reporting information. This was the latter. At the Wizengamot. He thinks the accord can be legally contested if the original blood wards are argued as the prior and superior claim. Daphne looked at him with the full, precise attention she usually reserved for important things. Why are you telling me this? He held her gaze. Under the practiced Malfoy composure, something worked, something conflicted, something that was genuinely trying to resolve an internal problem rather than perform one. Because it's useful to you, he said finally. And because, he stopped. Because, she said. Because I don't think my father is right about everything, he said, quickly, like he was stepping off a ledge. About all of it. The things he says about Potter, about blood status, he stopped again. His jaw tightened. I don't think the way he needs me to think about it. And I don't know what to do with that. Daphne was quiet for a moment. She was aware that this was a significant thing, that Draco Malfoy saying this to her was an act of genuine risk, that he was trusting her not to weaponize it, and that the trust was fragile in the specific way that trust was fragile when it had no precedent to stand on. I'm not going to tell anyone, she said. His shoulders didn't exactly drop, but something in his posture shifted. No? No. What you think privately is yours. She held his gaze. But if your father challenges the accord, you should understand what he's challenging. He's not challenging a legal arrangement. He's challenging old magic. Family magic, specifically, and family magic doesn't respond well to legal arguments. It responds to the thing that created it. She paused. The thing that created the accord is still very much present. Draco was quiet for a moment. Potter, he said. And me, she said. He looked at her for a long moment, the real look, not the performed version, the look of someone trying to understand something rather than dismiss it. You actually care about him, he said. Not accusing. Trying to understand. He's my family, she said simply. But he's a... Draco caught whatever he'd been about to say and reconsidered it. She watched him reconsidering it and thought, again, that he was more intelligent than the role he'd been given. He's exactly what he is, she said. Which is more than most people manage. Draco looked at the fire for a moment. Then he stood, gathering his things, and he was pulling the composure back around himself. She could see it, the subtle reconstruction, the Malfoy mask resettling, but before he finished he said, quietly, tell Potter he should be more careful in the corridors after hours. She looked up sharply. Not a threat, he said. Filch has a new route this term. Tuesdays and Thursdays the third floor is covered between 9 and midnight. He paused. I find routes useful to know. Then he walked away, the composure fully reconstructed, perfect Malfoy again, and Daphne watched him go and thought about cages and intelligence and what happened when someone smart enough to see the bars was also terrified of what existed outside them. She wrote it all in her letter to her father that night. Every word. And she added, at the bottom, in her precise small hand, the accord will need to be ready. Whatever Lucius Malfoy is planning, it won't be just legal. Prepare accordingly. She sealed it, sent it with her owl, and went to sleep in the dungeon dormitory with the cold castle stones around her and the accord bond carrying a steady, quiet, watchful signal across the dark space between the dungeons and Gryffindor Tower. Still here, it said, in the language that wasn't language. She knew. Chapter 4, the third floor corridor. The first snow came to Hogwarts in November, and with it came the particular compressed energy of a castle full of children who had spent 3 months figuring out how things worked and were now, armed with that knowledge, ready to start making things interesting. Harry noticed the shift the way he noticed most environmental changes, not dramatically, but completely. The social architecture of Gryffindor Tower had clarified itself over the first weeks into something he understood well enough to navigate. Ron was his primary companion, easy and genuine in the way that people were easy when they didn't have an agenda. Hermione had attached herself to both of them after an incident in October involving a troll, a bathroom, and a series of decisions that Harry had made very quickly and that Hermione had afterwards described as reckless but geometrically sound. Which was the most Hermione possible assessment of any situation. Neville Longbottom drifted in and out of their orbit with the apologetic energy of someone who still wasn't sure he deserved to be there, and whom Harry had made a quiet ongoing project of not treating as though he needed to apologize for existing. The troll incident deserved a brief note, not because it was complicated but because of what it had established. Harry had felt the troll before anyone announced it, felt its magical signature, which was less a signature than a magical absence, a blank aggressive presence in the castle's ambient energy that moved wrong. He'd told Ron 2 minutes before McGonagall burst into the Great Hall looking like a woman confronting the specific thing she'd been professionally afraid of for 30 years. They'd already been moving. The brief version, Hermione had been in the bathroom, crying, because Ron had said something thoughtless that Harry had already told Ron was thoughtless. The troll had found her. Harry and Ron had found the troll. The troll had not found this arrangement satisfactory, which had been, ultimately, its problem. Harry had not used a wand for most of it. Ron had managed a Wingardium Leviosa on the club that had, technically, provided the finishing blow. When McGonagall arrived and wanted to know how 3 first years had incapacitated a fully grown mountain troll, Harry had said the club had fallen on it, which was true as far as it went, and McGonagall had looked at him with the expression she'd worn since approximately the second week of term, a precise, complicated expression that contained equal parts approval, concern, and the specific discomfort of someone adjusting a model that had previously seemed adequate. She'd given them 20 points each and told them not to do it again. Harry had not pointed out that the doing it again would depend substantially on whether trolls kept getting into the castle. That was November's first week. By the third week, with snow on the ground and Quidditch practice turning the pitch into a mud and ice obstacle course, the problem of Quirrell had moved to the front of the queue. Cyrus Greengrass had written back within 48 hours of Daphne's first letter. Harry had his copy, they'd written separately but coordinated the content, which was something they'd established as practice because Cyrus received 2 independent accounts and could triangulate, and he'd read it 3 times. The letter was, in its way, a masterclass in how to say alarming things in complete calm. Cyrus confirmed that Flamel's stone had been moved to Hogwarts. This he'd confirmed through a contact at the Ministry who hadn't told him directly but who had said enough in the wrong context for someone paying attention to assemble. He confirmed that Dumbledore knew about the break-in attempt at Gringotts and considered it Voldemort-connected. He confirmed that Lucius Malfoy had made preliminary inquiries at the Wisengamot about the legal standing of the Greengrass Accord, preliminary only, nothing filed, but the inquiry is itself a signal. And then, at the bottom, in handwriting that was more deliberate than the rest, as if he'd stopped and thought about what to say, Harry. Daphne. What you've identified about Quirrell is consistent with information I've been building since summer. I'm not going to tell you to do nothing, because you won't, and because doing nothing may not be the appropriate response. What I'm going to tell you is this: do not move on it alone. Do not act without a plan. And write to me before you make any decision that can't be undone. Your mother sends her love. Astoria says to remind you about the tree. Harry had read that last line 4 times. The tree, Daphne had said, when he'd shown her. She wants me to know she hasn't given up on teaching me to climb it, he'd said. She won't, Daphne had confirmed, and for a moment they'd just been 2 11-year-olds who missed being home, and then they'd gone back to the problem. The problem, in November, had developed a new dimension. Harry felt it on a Tuesday evening, coming back from the library with Ron and Hermione. They were on the 2nd floor, arguing about the essay due Thursday for Binns. The goblin is still goblin, Ron said, just more historically contextualized, and Hermione was explaining at speed why that sentence was wrong in several directions at once, and Harry wasn't fully in the conversation because he was aware, the way he'd been aware all term in the way of something that wouldn't quite resolve, of a presence. The dark doubled signature. It moved through the castle at irregular intervals. He'd been tracking it without making it a project, the way you track something in peripheral vision, and tonight it was on the 3rd floor. Not moving. Stationary. And pointed at something with the quality of focused intent rather than ambient presence. I'll meet you in the common room, Harry said. Ron looked at him. What? I want to check something. 5 minutes. Hermione looked at him with the precise, sharp assessment she deployed when she knew someone wasn't giving her the full account and was deciding whether to press it. She'd learned in October that Harry not giving the full account usually preceded something happening, and that the something was generally important. 10 minutes, she said. And then I'm coming to find you. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The third-floor corridor was empty. Cold, stone, lit by the guttering torches that always seemed slightly insufficient up here, as though the castle itself was discouraging lingering. At the far end, the door. And in front of the door, Professor Quirrell. He wasn't doing anything obvious. He was standing with his back to Harry, facing the door, and the doubled magical signature was blazing, not faint, as it usually was, but vivid, pressurized, the way a signal intensified when it was actively engaged rather than dormant. The turban moved very slightly, like something shifting beneath it, and the cold wrongness of the signature made the accord bond pulse with a sharp warning note that went straight down Harry's spine. Harry stood at the far end of the corridor. He had time to make a decision. He could leave. Come back. Tell Daphne first, tell Cyrus, plan accordingly. That was the right choice. That was definitely the right choice. Then Quirrell turned around. He must have felt Harry's presence, or something else felt it, the dark cold thing under the turban, with senses that probably didn't need eyes to work. Quirrell's expression went through something complicated and arrived at a stretched, wrong smile that didn't fit his face. P. Potter, Quirrell said. Professor, Harry said. What are you doing up here? Walking, Harry said. You? A pause. The turban moved again. The signature spiked, and Harry felt it with the full awareness of everything Serena Greengrass had taught him, cold, dark, furiously hungry, the magical signature of something that had been reduced to almost nothing and was constantly, desperately pressing against its own diminishment. Just checking, Quirrell said. The corridor. Locked. He gestured at the door. Safe. Harry said. They looked at each other across 20 feet of cold stone. What Harry felt then was not fear. It was something more interesting than fear, a kind of absolute clarity, like the moment in wandless training when everything stopped being effort and became precision. He was standing in a corridor looking at a man possessed by the fragmented remnant of the darkest wizard of the last century, and he was 11 years old, and the information arranged itself around him like a solved equation. He can't do what he came to do while I'm here. He's not ready yet. He won't move on me in the open. Good night, Professor, Harry said. Good night, Potter. Harry turned and walked back down the corridor at an entirely normal pace, and the back of his neck prickled with the focused attention of the cold thing, but nothing happened, and he turned the corner and exhaled once, hard, and went to find Daphne. She was in the greenhouse courtyard. He'd sent the bond a sharp signal, the non-verbal communication they developed over 2 years, imprecise but urgent, and she'd been there in 10 minutes, which meant she'd left whatever she'd been doing mid-sentence. He told her everything. She listened without interrupting. He was testing the door, she said. Or communicating with whatever's behind it. The signature had the quality of, he searched for the word. Active reach. Like he was trying to feel through the door. He can't get through the protections yet. Not alone, Harry said. But he's working on it. He paused. Daphne. The thing inside him, I've never felt anything like it. It's not just dark magic. It's like someone took something immense and reduced it to almost nothing, but the immensity is still in the shape of what's left. Like a broken mirror, she said quietly. Still the same glass. Still shows the same thing, just fragmented. He looked at her. Yes. We need to tell Dumbledore, she said. We need to tell your father first. We can do both simultaneously. He was quiet for a moment. What's Dumbledore going to do with the information? Presumably address the problem of Voldemort being in his defense, Professor. Or he already knows, Harry said. The silence that followed was the kind that meant they were both sitting with a thought that neither of them wanted to be the first to say. "He knows," Daphne said at last. "Doesn't he? He set the trap, the stone, the protections, the corridor. He built a situation designed to draw Voldemort into a specific place at a specific time. And put a school full of children around it," Harry said. "He thinks the protections are sufficient." "He thinks I'm a protection," Harry said. "That's why I'm here. The castle is the bait and I'm the, he stopped. "The endgame," she said. The word sat between them in the cold November air. "I'm not going to be managed into a confrontation I haven't chosen," Harry said. It was very quiet and very absolute in the specific way that things Harry decided were absolute, not performance, just the simple announcement of a fact about himself. "If something has to happen, it happens on my terms. Then we control the information," she said. "We know what we know. We keep knowing it. We don't let anyone, Dumbledore, Voldemort, Lucius Malfoy, anyone, decide the shape of this for us." He nodded. Looked up at the castle, at the lit windows, at the 1,000-year-old stones that had soaked up so much magic they practically generated their own light at this hour. "We need to know what's behind the door," he said. "Yes. Not to interfere with it. To know. There's a difference between intelligence and action," she agreed. "We're gathering intelligence. Draco said Filch covers the 3rd floor Tuesdays and Thursdays between 9 and midnight." She looked at him. "It's Tuesday." "Yes." "It's 8:43. "Yes." She looked at the castle for a moment. Then she pulled her robe straight with the brisk efficiency of someone who had moved from planning to execution. "We'll need a distraction for Filch." "I have the invisibility cloak," Harry said. She paused. "Of course you do. It was my father's. Dumbledore sent it anonymously. I think he was trying to, I don't know, set up a specific narrative. But it's useful. It won't cover 2 people well. I know. You'll need to be quick and quiet through the corridor. I'll handle the door." "The lock?" "I've been working on it since September," he said simply. She looked at him with the expression that was fond and exasperated and deeply unsurprised in equal measure, which was the expression she wore most consistently in his presence and which she was not yet in the habit of examining too carefully. "Lead on," she said. The corridor was empty when they arrived, Filch's new route apparently holding, the torches guttering in the same insufficient way. Harry handed the cloak to Daphne. She took it with the quick, precise movements of someone filing away the sensation of holding a genuine Deathly Hallow for later examination, and walked to the door. The lock was an Allohammer-resistant charm, as he'd identified in September, but resistance to Allohammer was not the same as resistance to everything, and what it was actually resistant to was the specific vibrational frequency that Allohammer operated on. It was old enough to have been designed before the charm was standardized, which meant it had been designed against the predecessor charm, which operated differently. He'd spent 6 weeks working out what the predecessor charm was. He put his hand flat against the door and felt the lock. Mechanical, layered, magical in the old sense, not a spell sitting on top of a lock but a spell woven into the structure, the way old magic integrated rather than applied. He felt its frequency. Found the gap in the resistance. Pushed, not with wand magic, with the structural intent his father had been training since August, a focused application of will to a specific magical frequency, surgical rather than blunt. The lock opened. Not with a click. With a sigh, almost, like something that had been waiting. He pushed the door and they went through. The room beyond was not what he'd expected, and then immediately was, because Dumbledore had apparently been very literal about multiple layers of protection and the first layer was a large dog with 3 heads. It was asleep. Snoring, all 3 heads at different rhythms, filling the small room with a sound like a minor weather event. Harry stood just inside the door and took in the room, the three-headed dog occupying most of it, the trapdoor underneath its nearest paw that it had been very deliberately placed over, the enchanted harp in the corner currently producing the music that was keeping it asleep, the harp running down on its own magic and slowing, the next note not quite arriving. "Fluffy," Daphne murmured at his shoulder, "invisible." He looked at her voice. "What?" "Hagrid's. That's Hagrid's dog. I read about it in a letter Astoria got. She's been corresponding with him about blast-ended scruts for reasons I've chosen not to examine." A pause. "He calls it Fluffy." Harry looked at the dog. The dog snored. "Fluffy," he said. "Don't," she said. He crossed to the harp quickly, careful not to disturb anything, and felt the enchantment still running through it. Wind charm, self-perpetuating but running on borrowed time. Whoever had said it had given it about 4 hours and it had been going for closer to 6. He touched it and the enchantment steadied, refreshed, the music picking up strength. All three had settled deeper into sleep. The trapdoor was accessible if you moved the paw, which was not something Harry intended to do tonight. He looked at it. Below it, he sent his awareness down, pressing through stone and wood and the magical static of the dog above, protections, layered, multiple, the distinct magical signatures of multiple casters. He could feel Dumbledore's at the bottom, distant and deep. Above it, others. One of them was Quirrell's. He stepped back from the trap door. Filed everything. Reinforced the harp charm. They were back in the corridor in under 4 minutes, door locked behind them, the same lock, closed the same way. No trace. They moved quickly, back through the corridor, down the stairs, into the relative warmth of the castle's inhabited levels, and Harry felt the bond carrying Daphne's focused alertness like a live wire until they reached the empty classroom on the second floor they'd been using for this kind of debrief since October. She dropped the cloak and produced her notebook from somewhere. "Quirrell's already breached one of the protection layers," Harry said. "I felt his signature on one of the traps." She was already writing. "That means he has access to the sublevels. Or he had access. He can get past one layer." Harry sat on the edge of a desk. "Dumbledore's is at the bottom. I don't think Quirrell can get through that." "Not yet," she said. "But if he removes enough of the middle layers, he doesn't need to get through Dumbledore's protection if he removes enough of what's above it." "It's a staircase," she said. "He's taking it one step at a time." She paused. "How many layers did you count?" 6 above Dumbledore's. Possibly 7. He thought back. Herbology. Something mechanical, could be Flitwick, could be someone else. Transfiguration, that's McGonagall. And Quirrell's was the second from the top. "He's already passed his own protection and one above it," she said. "That means, he has 5 remaining obstacles between himself and Dumbledore's lair." Harry paused. "Probably the mirror of Eriste at the bottom." She stopped writing and looked at him. The mirror of Eriste. Dumbledore's was the deepest and strongest and had the particular quality of something that required the right internal state to interact with correctly, not just power. Harry met her eyes. "The mirror shows you what you want most. If you want to find the stone, you see yourself finding the stone. If you want to use the stone, you see yourself using it." He paused. "Dumbledore's protection requires you to want to find the stone but not use it." She was quiet for a moment. "Which means the only person who can actually retrieve it, is someone who doesn't want to use it," he said. "Which Voldemort never will be." "It's actually quite elegant," she said, with the precision of someone capable of admiring a clever mechanism even when it was designed by someone she had complicated feelings about. "Then, does it account for you?" He looked at her. "You could retrieve it," she said. "You could get to the mirror before Voldemort does and you could retrieve it and then what? We give it back to Flamel? We destroy it? Do we even want to destroy the Philosopher's Stone?" "We want Voldemort not to have it," Harry said. "Everything else is secondary." Your father wrote to not act alone, she said. I know. And we agreed. We did, he said. He was quiet for a moment. But if Quirrell gets through the remaining protections before we've set up a response, then the response needs to be faster than Quirrell, she said. Not premature. She closed her notebook. We write to Father tonight. We lay out everything, the layers, the timeline, Quirrell's current position. We get a response within 48 hours. If nothing has changed in the protections by then, we wait for the response and plan accordingly. And if something changes? Then we respond to the change. She held his gaze. Harry. We don't go down that trapdoor without a plan. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, all right. Tonight. Tonight, she confirmed. They wrote the letters in the empty classroom, side by side, Harry's handwriting loose and fast and Daphne's small and precise, and outside the second-floor windows the snow had started again, coming down in the heavy determined way that meant it intended to stay. The response came in 36 hours, which meant Cyrus had treated it as urgent, and the letter it arrived in was different from the previous ones, thicker, sealed with the Greengrass family seal pressed deep into green wax, carrying the faint magical warmth of a document that had been secured before sending. Harry read it with Daphne in the greenhouse courtyard, their breath making small clouds in the December cold, and when he finished reading he sat with it for a moment before saying anything. Your father knows Dumbledore is managing this deliberately, he said. Yes. And he's going to the Wizengamot. Not about this specifically, she said. She had her own copy and was on her second reading. About Lucius's challenge to the Accord. The timing creates, Father thinks if Lucius files the challenge in January, as he's apparently planning to do, and Father can make the Accord's validity a public matter, it creates pressure on Dumbledore from both sides. Dumbledore can't quietly manage us if the Accord is publicly affirmed. And if the Accord is publicly affirmed, your father has legal standing to demand information about the stone's security. As the magical guardian of one of the students at risk in the school where it's housed. She looked up from the letter. Yes. Harry thought about this. It was elegant, in the same way the mirror was elegant, a solution that used the opposition's move against them. Lucius filing the challenge became the mechanism by which the Greengrass family gained leverage over the whole situation. Your father's good at this, Harry said. He's had a long time to practice, she said, and there was something warm in the way she said it, the particular warmth of someone proud of a person they love. There's a line at the end, Harry said. She was already reading it. He watched her expression process it, the small precise change around her eyes that meant she was recalibrating something. The bond will strengthen under pressure, Cyrus had written. It was made for this, not for safety, but for exactly the moment when safety ends. Trust it. Trust each other. Trust the magic. The greenhouse courtyard was very quiet. Snow fell on the stone around them in slow, deliberate flakes. Trust the magic, Daphne said, a little quietly. Yes, Harry said. She folded her letter with the neat precision she folded everything, and when she looked up at him her expression had the particular quality it had very rarely, not the composed, analytic Daphne who approached problems as equations, but something more direct, less armored, the thing that was there when the armor was briefly unnecessary. I do trust it, she said. In case that wasn't, she stopped. It was clear, he said. He meant it simply and entirely. She nodded once, and the armor was back, not because she needed it against him but because it was habitual, because she'd worn it long enough that it returned on its own, and she stood and brushed snow from her robes. We need to tell Hermione, she said. He blinked. Why? Because she's going to figure it out anyway, and when she does she's either going to act without us or spend 3 days being furious that we didn't involve her. And she's useful. Daphne looked at him. She's very useful, Harry. Don't let her being occasionally insufferable obscure that. I know she's useful, he said, slightly affronted. I said her notes were the most organized I'd ever seen. You also called her aggressively correct. Both things are true. Then use both things, Daphne said, and started back toward the castle, and after a moment Harry followed, and the snow kept falling in its patient, indifferent way, covering everything equally. Hermione Granger's response to being told about the Philosopher's Stone, Voldemort in Quirrell's turban, the trapdoor, the 6 layers of protection, and Cyrus Greengrass's political maneuvering was to sit completely still for approximately 25 seconds and then produce the longest list Harry had ever seen a person generate from nothing in under 2 minutes. She'd met him and Daphne in the library. They'd brought her in on a Sunday, which meant she had the focused, undistracted quality she only had when she wasn't also managing 6 impending homework deadlines, and she'd listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which had been its own exercise in restraint, her quill hovering over parchment the whole time with the barely leashed energy of someone waiting for a moment to deploy it. "Right," she said when they finished. "Right." The quill started moving. "We need a complete map of what we know about each protective layer, cross-referenced with the caster's known specialties so we can predict the mechanisms. We need a timeline of Quirrell's third-floor visits. Do you have dates? To estimate how quickly he's working through the protections. We need to know if there are countermeasures we can place that wouldn't disturb the existing protections but would alert us to breach. I've been monitoring the protections directly," Harry said. "I'll know when a layer falls." Hermione looked at him. Then at Daphne. Then back at Harry. "You can feel the protections from here?" "I can feel magical structures at range if I know what I'm looking for," Harry said. "I've had the signature mapped since October." Another 25-second silence. "That is extraordinary," she said, in the tone she used when something was so impressive that she needed a moment to integrate it without it threatening her self-image. "All right. That addresses the monitoring requirement. The next question is," she looked at her list. "Do we want the stone to survive this or not?" Harry and Daphne looked at each other. "That's the right question," Daphne said. There was a note of genuine approval in her voice. Hermione looked slightly pleased despite herself. "Flamel is over 600 years old," she said. "The stone is the only reason he's still alive. If it's destroyed, he and his wife die." She paused. "But if Voldemort gets it, he uses it to restore himself to a body, and then there are rather larger problems than one elderly alchemist's mortality." "The stone has to be secured," Harry said. "Not destroyed. Not used. Secured and returned to Flamel through proper channels." He paused. "Which is what Dumbledore is trying to do, just using methods I object to." "The methods being?" Hermione asked. "Using me as an unknowing part of the trap," Harry said flatly. "The boy who lived as the final variable. Whatever Voldemort runs into at the end of those protections, I'm supposed to be part of it." Hermione absorbed this. "Right," she said again, more quietly. "So we need to either complete the trap on our own terms, get to the stone before Quirrell does, secure it safely, or we need to reinforce the existing protections enough to slow Quirrell until Dumbledore's political situation allows him to deal with it directly." She looked at Harry. "When does your father's move at the Wizengamot happen?" "January at the earliest," Daphne said. "But Lucius may force the timeline if he senses the political moment is shifting." "Which means Quirrell may also accelerate if Lucius signals," Harry said. "They're coordinated," Daphne said. It had crystallized for her last week, she'd said, the way Lucius's legal challenge and Quirrell's timetable fit together too neatly to be coincidental. Lucius wants the stone. Not just for Voldemort's restoration, for what Voldemort's restoration means for his own political position. He's been managing a post-Voldemort world for 10 years and it's never been comfortable for him. He wants the certainty back. So Quirrell gets the stone, Harry said, and Voldemort comes back, and Lucius has the inside position on the new order. While simultaneously having the Accord legally challenged, which removes your protection and returns you to being a manageable piece of someone else's game, Daphne finished. Hermione was writing so fast her handwriting was becoming illegible, which was a state Harry had never previously seen Hermione's handwriting reach. "This is significantly more complicated than I thought when I was separately investigating the stone," she said, slightly breathless. "You were separately investigating the stone," Harry said. "Since September," she said, not looking up. "I thought you knew." "I didn't know." "Well." She turned a page. "Now you do." Harry looked at Daphne. Daphne looked back at him with the expression that meant she'd known and hadn't told him because she'd wanted to see how long it took him to find out on his own. "You knew," he said. "I suspected," she said. "Same thing." "Not technically." "You're both doing the thing," Hermione said, still writing. "My parents do the thing. Can we please, the stone? The plan." Harry looked at the snow falling outside the library windows and thought about the layers of protection beneath the corridor floor, about Quirrell standing in the dark with a cold dark thing pressed against the inside of the door, about Cyrus moving pieces across the Wizengamot, about a mirror that would only give the stone to someone who wanted it for the right reason. "I can get the stone," he said. "From the mirror. Tonight, before Quirrell gets through another layer." "You want to use it," Hermione said immediately. "The mirror tests your desire. If you go there wanting to take the stone, I don't want to use it," he said. "I want to make sure Voldemort doesn't get it." "Is that not the same as wanting to find it?" "No," he said. "One is about acquisition. One is about protection." He held Hermione's gaze. "The mirror shows you your deepest desire. My deepest desire in relation to the stone is that it's safe. That no one uses it for the wrong purpose. That Flamel doesn't die because some dark wizard wanted immortality." He paused. "That's not the same as wanting to possess it." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Daphne. "He's right," Daphne said. "The mechanism works on intent, not action. If the intent is genuinely protective, the mirror recognizes it. And if it doesn't?" Hermione asked. "Then I see myself with the stone and don't have it," Harry said, "and we're no worse off than now." Another long pause. The library was very quiet. Snow fell outside. "All right," Hermione said. "But if you're going tonight, I'm going with you." "Both of you," Daphne said. Harry started to say something. "Both of you," Daphne repeated, in the tone that was her mother's tone, the one she deployed occasionally and that had the quality of a door closing firmly. "I'll meet you at the third-floor entrance at midnight." He looked at her for a moment. The bond was carrying something warm and certain. "Midnight," he said. Chapter 5, The Accord Tested. The stone was cold. Harry had expected it to feel significant, ancient, weighty with everything it was and everything it could do. Instead it sat in his palm like a normal stone, smooth and red and smaller than he'd imagined, and the only remarkable thing about holding it was the faint warmth at its core, steady as a heartbeat, the particular warmth of something that had been generating life for centuries and hadn't stopped. The mirror had given it to him without hesitation. That was the thing he kept coming back to, standing in the chamber beneath the trapdoor while Hermione catalogued the room with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had decided that comprehensive documentation was the appropriate response to extraordinary circumstances. The mirror had shown him his reflection standing in a dark chamber, and his reflection had reached into its pocket and placed the stone into his hand, and he'd felt the weight of it appear in his palm without drama or condition, just, here. "You asked for the right reasons." He'd stood in front of that mirror and felt, for one clear moment, the full shape of what he wanted, and it wasn't the stone, and it wasn't power, and it wasn't even safety in the simple sense. What he'd wanted, in the deepest and most honest part of himself, was for the people he loved to be safe. His family. Daphne. Astoria's ridiculous face when she lectured him about trees. Cyrus's measured voice working through a problem. Serena's warmth, which was so different from any warmth he'd known in the first 9 years of his life that he still sometimes felt the difference like a physical thing. He'd wanted them safe. The stone was incidental to that, a means rather than an end, and the mirror had looked at that want and given him exactly what he needed. Voldemort, who had wanted the stone for itself, for what it would give him, had been standing in this same chamber through Quirrell's borrowed eyes 3 nights ago. Harry had felt it, the dark signature pressed against the mirror's magic with mounting fury, and gotten nothing. "Harry," Daphne said. He looked up. She was standing in the doorway of the chamber. She'd stayed at the threshold, which was the agreement, Hermione and Harry going through and Daphne holding the position at the entrance, and her expression was the one that meant something had changed outside. "Quirrell," he said. Not a question. "Moving. Fast." She wasn't alarmed. She was the way she was when variables accelerated past the planned timeline, focused, recalibrating in real time. "He's at the top level. He must have felt you go through." Harry closed his hand around the stone. "How long?" "Minutes. The dog is all ready. I don't know what he did to it, but it's not a problem for him anymore." He looked at Hermione, who was standing very straight with her wand out and the particular expression she wore when she was frightened and had decided that being frightened was not going to affect her performance. He thought, not for the first time, that Hermione Granger was one of the braver people he'd ever met, and that the wizarding world was going to take a very long time to understand that. "We go," he said. "Not back. Forward." "The protections," Hermione started. "I've already breached them going down," he said, moving toward the door. "Same path back is faster." "Daphne." She had her wand in her hand. The bond was carrying a high, clear, ready signal. "I know," she said. They went. What happened in the following 4 minutes was later described by Hermione in her personal journal as a series of extremely rapid decisions made under conditions that didn't allow for the degree of deliberation I would have preferred, which was, Harry thought when she eventually showed him, the most accurate account anyone produced. The chess set was McGonagall's. It filled a chamber that had no other exit, the pieces enormous and still as statues in the torchlight, the board between them and the door beyond. Hermione saw it and went through a 2-second calculation and said, "I know this," with the quiet certainty of someone for whom chess was not recreation but architecture, and moved to the White Queen Square. She played brilliantly. Harry watched her do it with the admiration he reserved for people performing at the absolute edge of their capability. She moved the pieces with her wand like she'd been doing it for years, calling positions in the crisp terminology of a serious player, her face absolutely focused, and in 3 minutes 40 seconds she had the board open and the Black King capitulating and the far door accessible. The knight's horse moved to block them anyway. It moved wrong, not part of the game, something else, the heavy magical compulsion of a protection that had been tampered with. The piece reared and Hermione went backwards and Harry stepped forward and put his hand out and pushed. Not a spell. Not a wand motion. The focused structural intent his father had spent 2 years building, weight, mass, magical compulsion, stop, and the knight stopped mid-motion with the grinding reluctance of something fighting a force it hadn't expected, and held, trembling with the effort of countervailing Harry's push. "Go," Harry said. His voice was entirely level. Daphne and Hermione went through the door. Harry released the push in a controlled withdrawal and moved through as the knight crashed forward into empty space behind him, and the door sealed shut, and they were in the next chamber. Hermione's sleeve was torn. She looked at it, then at Harry, then at the door. "That piece had been interfered with," she said. "Quirrell," Daphne said. "He's ahead of us." Harry felt it immediately, the dark signature, no longer dormant or directed upward but coming from below, from the final chamber. Moving, focused, and underneath it a colder, older darkness opening like a wound. "He got through the devil's snare and something else," Harry said. "He's at the mirror." "Then we're done," Hermione said. "He can't get the stone from the mirror if, I already took the stone," Harry said. The silence lasted approximately 1 second. "You," Hermione started. "From the mirror. It's in my pocket." He kept moving through the chamber, potions, a logic puzzle, Snape's work by the structure of it, and Hermione made a sound that was half outrage and half involuntary respect and swept her eyes over the bottles with the rapid intelligence of someone whose entire academic year of potions work was suddenly load-bearing. Second from the left going forward, she said, barely pausing. The round bottle going back. The smallest bottle for the fire, there are only enough doses for one person. Harry and Daphne both looked at her. I looked up every protection style used by each professor in September, she said, slightly defensive. I wanted to understand the scope of what was down here. Was that not? It's wonderful, Daphne said, with the quick precision of someone correcting a misapprehension. Hermione. It's wonderful. Take the return potion and go back. Hermione looked at them. The frightened and decided expression again, the one that was frightened and decided simultaneously. I should go back, Harry said. Not unkindly, directly, the way he said things he meant. Send an owl to Dumbledore and to Cyrus. Everything. Tonight. He held her gaze. You're the only one who knows enough of what we know to tell it correctly. That matters more right now than being in the last chamber. She looked at them for a long moment, the two of them, Daphne in her Slytherin robes and Harry in his Gryffindor robes with the stone in his pocket, standing in the firelit chamber at the end of 11 months of building toward this, and her expression did something complicated that resolved into something that looked like trust. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, she said. That leaves most things open, Daphne said. Hermione's mouth moved despite itself. She took the smallest bottle, drank it, and stepped through the black flame without looking back. Harry took the round bottle and felt it, forward, through the purple flame, and the cold dark signature on the other side was very close now. Daphne's hand closed briefly on his wrist. Not stopping him. Something else. He looked at her. The bond was carrying the clearest signal it had ever sent, not alarm, not strategy, not the focused analytical quality of Daphne in problem-solving mode. Something quieter. Something that had been accumulating for 2 years in the private unfiled part of her mind. Come back, she said. Short. Simple. Meaning considerably more than 2 words could technically contain. Obviously, he said. He meant it with the same comprehensiveness. She released his wrist and they went through together. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror. He'd gone still when they entered, the kind of stillness that preceded something violently kinetic, but he hadn't moved yet and Harry understood why. Whatever Quirrell had been doing with the mirror, he'd been doing it with the expectation of being alone, and 2 unexpected presences had disrupted the calculation. The chamber was circular, torchlit, the mirror dominating the far wall with its elaborate gold frame and the inscription running across the top in the reversed lettering that Harry had deciphered in half a minute the first time, I show not your face but your heart's desire. The reflection in it right now showed Quirrell's surface image and behind it, barely visible, the outline of something else, a face that wasn't Quirrell's, angular and pale, overlaid on his reflection like a transparency. P. Potter, Quirrell said. The stutter was worse down here. More frequent, less controlled, as though proximity to whatever was at the bottom of the castle disrupted it. Professor, Harry said. It shouldn't be here. Neither should you. Quirrell's hands were moving, small, nervous movements at his sides, the wand in his right hand performing tiny oscillations, testing options. Harry read it the way he read magical environments, with full attention, taking in everything simultaneously rather than sequentially. Quirrell's signature was almost entirely secondary now, the dark doubled presence having expanded to occupy most of the available magical space, pressing outward with the urgency of something that had been confined too long and sensed an opening. You have it, Quirrell said, and his voice had changed, the stutter gone, something else in its place, layered and wrong, not quite one voice anymore. The mirror gave it to you. Yes. Give it to me. Harry looked at him. No. Quirrell's wand came up and Harry was already moving, not away, sideways, and the spell Quirrell cast went past him and hit the mirror, and the mirror rang like a struck bell, the image in it shattering and reforming, and Daphne was on Quirrell's right flank casting a binding charm with the clean, precise technique of 2 years of Greengrass training, and Quirrell deflected it with a casual swat that sent the magic into the floor. He was stronger than he looked. Significantly stronger. The dark presence was feeding power into him, and Harry filed the observation without letting it change his assessment. Strong was a variable, not a conclusion. You do not understand what you are interfering with, Quirrell said, and it was the double voice again, the cold thing underneath speaking through him openly now, not pretending. I have been waiting, years, reduced to this. His hand jerked to the turban and Harry understood with sudden clarity what was about to happen. Daphne, he said, don't look at the back of his head. I know, she said from his right. Quirrell's hands went to the turban. Harry put his hand forward, not toward Quirrell but between them, and he thought about the stone walls of Greengrass Manor, about the warmth that had hit him when the accord was invoked, about the compass settling, about safety and family and everything the mirror had shown him, and he pushed. Not the structural intent he'd used on the chess piece. Something larger. The accord bond running through him like a live circuit, the family magic that had been building in his bones for 11 months, the specific magical truth of someone who wanted protection rather than power. He pushed it outward in a sustained, deliberate wave and it hit the space between them and Quirrell like a physical force. Quirrell staggered. The turban fell away. And there it was, the face on the back of the head, and it was worse than descriptions and worse than nightmares, chalk-white and red-eyed and reduced by years and desperation to something that was barely a face at all, a sketch of Voldemort rather than the thing itself. It turned its eyes on Harry with a fury that had the quality of a banked fire suddenly given air. Potter, it said. Not Quirrell's voice. Nothing like Quirrell's voice. Harry felt it in his scar, not pain exactly, more like pressure, like something pressing against a sealed door and finding less resistance than it expected. The accord bond pulsed once, hard, and pushed back. You think that trinket of old magic protects you, the voice said. You think a child's bargain with a minor family. It's not a minor family, Daphne said, from slightly to Harry's right, in the pleasant, precise tone she used when correcting something she found slightly tedious to have to correct. And it's not a trinket. The red eyes moved to her. A Greengrass, it said, with the specific contempt of something that had assessed and dismissed 1,000 things and filed the Greengrasses under negligible. Playing at being relevant. We're past playing, she said. Harry looked at Quirrell, at the man, not the face on the back of his head. Quirrell was shaking. Not from magic, from something else, something breaking internally, the particular dissolution of a person who had agreed to something they'd thought they understood and had found out too late what the agreement actually cost. His hands were trembling. His eyes were focused on the wall beside Harry with the unfocused gaze of someone who had been somewhere else for a very long time. Harry made a decision. He walked forward. Not fast, not aggressive. The same unhurried pace he walked everywhere, the pace that said the opinion of the room was interesting data. Quirrell backed up automatically, the dark presence surging, Voldemort's face contorting with something between fury and calculation, and Harry kept walking until he was within arm's reach of Quirrell and then he put his hand on Quirrell's shoulder. Quirrell screamed. Not in anger, in pain, genuine physical agony, the sound wrenched out of him involuntarily, and his skin where Harry's hand touched was blistering, the dark magic burning against contact with the accord's protective warmth the way oil burned against water, violently and completely. Harry didn't let go. The protective magic ran through the contact like current, not a weapon, not directed at Quirrell specifically but at the thing using him, and he felt the dark presence scream too, a silent magical shriek that hit his scar like a spike, and the cold doubled signature began to come apart. You, Voldemort's voice was shredding at the edges. You cannot, he can, Daphne said quietly, from directly behind Harry now, her hand on his back between his shoulder blades, and the touch connected her to the current too, and Harry felt the accord bond blaze between them with a warmth that was the opposite of everything in that dark doubled signature, everything light had ever been against dark, and the dark presence contracted and shrieked and the mirror cracked. Straight down the center, a clean vertical fracture, the image in it splitting and going dark. Quirrell collapsed. The torches blazed once, enormously, and then two of them went out. Harry took his hand off Quirrell's shoulder and stepped back. Quirrell was on the floor, unconscious, alive. He was alive. Harry checked the signature immediately, still present, the dark thing gone from it. Completely gone. He felt the space where it had been with careful attention and found nothing. "It's gone," he said. "The possession. Whatever was left of it, when it retreated from the body it lost the fragment that was anchoring it here." "Gone as in destroyed?" Daphne asked. "Gone as in fled," Harry said. He looked at his hand. The palm was unmarked. It was already too reduced to survive direct contact with the accord. He paused. "It's not destroyed. It's gone. There's a difference." "I know," she said. She was looking at him with an expression he'd seen rarely enough that it always registered, the full unguarded version, without the armor, without the precise composure. "Just Daphne. Are you hurt?" "My scar aches," he said honestly. "Nothing else." She looked at his scar, at his face, with the attention she gave to things she was genuinely concerned about. Then she nodded, once, and the composure returned, and she was already looking at the chamber, assessing. "We need to seal this room," she said. "And we need to be upstairs when Dumbledore arrives." "Should we be upstairs when Dumbledore arrives?" he asked. She looked at him. "We have the stone," she said. "Voldemort has fled. Quirrell is incapacitated." She picked up her wand from where she'd set it to help anchor the accord magic. "The situation is resolved. We report it as such. We do not disappear into the shadows and let Dumbledore narrate it." Harry looked at the stone in his hand. "Warm. Steady." "Right," he said. He put it in his pocket. "We walk up the stairs." "We walk up the stairs," she agreed. "Together." Dumbledore was in the corridor outside the third-floor door when they reached the top, which meant either Hermione's owl had been remarkable fast or the headmaster had been closer than expected, and his expression when he saw them, coming up from the trapdoor, in one piece, carrying the quality of people who had handled something and were ready to discuss it, was the most unguarded Harry had seen him. He looked at Harry. At Daphne. At the closed trapdoor behind them. "Quirrell is alive," Harry said, before anything else, because that seemed like the most important immediate communication. "Unconscious, in the final chamber. The possession has been broken, whatever remained of Voldemort's presence in him retreated when the accord protections made direct inhabitation untenable." He reached into his pocket and held out the stone. "This needs to go back to Flamel." Dumbledore looked at the stone for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry, and Harry looked back, and there was a reckoning happening in the headmaster's eyes, the quiet collision of the situation he'd constructed and the situation that had actually occurred, of the boy he'd planned for and the boy who was standing in front of him, and the two of them were not the same boy. "You retrieved it from the mirror," Dumbledore said. "Yes. The mirror only gives the stone to someone who desires to find it but not to use it." A pause. "You are 11 years old." "Yes," Harry said again. Something in Dumbledore's expression shifted, the controlled, careful wisdom that he usually managed giving way, very briefly, to something more human. Not quite regret, not quite pride, something in the complicated space between them. He reached out and took the stone from Harry's palm with the careful reverence of someone handling something that contained a human life. "Quirrell will need medical attention," Daphne said. "The contact burns on his shoulder will require specialized treatment. The accord magic is not standard." Dumbledore looked at her. "You're Cyrus Greengrass's daughter," he said, and it wasn't exactly a question. "Yes," she said. "And you were down there with Harry." "Yes." Dumbledore looked at them both for another long moment. "I owe you an apology," he said, and it was different from the apology he delivered at the manor, which had been genuine but contained. This one was less structured. More personal. I built a situation around you, Harry, that I believed was necessary. I was not sufficiently, I did not account for who you had become. No, Harry said. Not harsh. Just honest. You accounted for who you expected me to be. Dumbledore held his gaze. Yes. That is precisely it. He closed his hand around the stone. I will need to speak with you both. Tomorrow, perhaps. When the night has settled. We'll be there, Harry said. Dumbledore moved past them toward the trapdoor, and then stopped and turned back, as if a thought had arrived that he hadn't planned for. The accord, he said. Your father is planning to raise it at the Wizengamot. In response to Lucius Malfoy's challenge, Daphne said. Yes. He looked at her carefully. Lucius's challenge is not purely legal. You understand that? I understand it, she said. We've been understanding it since September. Dumbledore looked at her for a moment more. Something in his expression was, she would think about this later, writing to her father, trying to find the right word for it, reconciliation, maybe. The expression of someone reconciling an outcome with a plan and finding them irreconcilable and choosing to accept the outcome rather than defend the plan. Your family's magic, he said, is very old, and very well chosen. Then he went through the trapdoor, and they were alone in the corridor. Harry exhaled slowly. Well, Daphne said. Well, he agreed. Ron found them at the top of the stairs at 1 a.m, which meant he'd been waiting, which meant Hermione had told him enough to know where to wait, and his face when he saw them had the specific quality of someone who had been extremely worried doing its best to look merely curious. Everything, he started. Handled, Harry said. Ron looked at him. At the empty hands, the scuffed robes, the particular quality of two people who had been through something and come out the other side. He looked at Daphne, in her Slytherin robes, standing in a Gryffindor stairwell at 1 a.m. with the composure of someone for whom this was not an irregular circumstance. Right, Ron said. Good. A pause. Hermione made me swear not to ask anything until morning. That was sensible of her, Daphne said. Yes, well. Ron looked slightly helpless. Are either of you hungry? I nicked half a pie from the kitchens. Harry laughed. The real one, arriving without warning. Yes, he said. Absolutely yes. The owl from Cyrus arrived the next morning before breakfast, which meant he'd sent it before Hermione's letter arrived, which meant he'd been watching his own channels and had seen something move. The letter was short. Lucius filed the Wizengamot challenge yesterday evening. 11 a.m. He accelerated his timeline. I am told by a contact at the ministry that he received information yesterday afternoon suggesting events at Hogwarts were moving faster than planned. Be ready. The hearing is set for January 14th. I will need both of you present. Harry read it twice. Daphne read it once and set it down. He knows the stone is secured, Harry said. Whatever Lucius was told, it was enough to make him panic and move early. Moving early means moving without full preparation, Daphne said. Which benefits your father. Which benefits us, she corrected, with the quiet precision of someone correcting a distinction they considered important. All of us. Harry looked at her. The morning light was coming through the great hall windows in long winter angles, landing on the Gryffindor table, and outside the windows the castle grounds were deep under December snow, and students around them were talking about the Christmas holidays and Quidditch scores and a dozen uncomplicated things, and the two of them were sitting at adjacent tables. She'd crossed the hall without ceremony, as she did sometimes, in a way that had generated approximately 47 separate comments from various students and exactly 0 comments from the relevant professors, which Harry interpreted as tacit institutional permission, reading a letter about a Wizengamot hearing. January, Harry said. Yes. We'll be home for Christmas first. Yes. Something in Daphne's voice went briefly soft at the word home, the way it had in his voice the first time he'd used it, not quite ready for it yet, needing a second to integrate its weight. Astoria has been writing me about the tree. I'm going to learn to climb it, Harry said. You're going to give yourself a chance to before January, she agreed. Because after January everything gets, she paused, choosing the word. Loud, Harry said. Loud, she agreed. Publicly, politically, significantly loud. She looked at her hands, which was a tell she had that she rarely exhibited. When she was working up to something she considered important, her eyes went down before they came up. Harry. The Wiesengemot hearing. Lucius is going to argue the accord is invalid. He's going to argue it in front of the full session, which means the full wizarding political world will be watching. She looked up. He's going to try to make it about you. About who you should be. About whether the Greengrass family has any right to have. She stopped. Have what? He said. Have you? She said, simply, and the word carried the full weight of everything it had accumulated in 2 years, not just legal standing, not just the magic, but the genuine specific truth of her family and him in it, of Astoria and the tree and Cyrus's study and Serena's warmth and the accord light blazing through the manor. Harry was quiet for a moment. The bond was very steady between them. He's not going to win that argument, Harry said. No, she said. He's not. But you need to be ready for what he'll try to take apart in the attempt. Her voice was even. He'll use your parents. He'll use the blood wards. He'll use Dumbledore. A pause. He might use me. Use you how? Suggest the bond is manipulative. That the Greengrasses have their own agenda for you. That a pureblood family positioning themselves as the guardians of the boy who lived is political opportunism rather than genuine protection. She looked at him steadily. None of it will be true. All of it will be designed to make you doubt it. He looked at her for a long moment. The winter light was very clear and very cold, and it landed on Daphne's face in a way that showed everything, the composure and the genuine concern underneath it, the armor and what it was protecting, the specific precise way she looked when she had decided to say something she usually kept in the private unfiled part. I don't doubt it, he said. She held his gaze. I know. I've never doubted it. Not once in 2 years. I know, she said again, quieter. So whatever Lucius tries to take apart, he said, he'll be working on something that isn't actually there to be damaged. You can't undermine something by arguing with it if the thing is real. He paused. The accord is real. Your family is my family. That's not an argument. It's just true. Daphne looked at him for a moment longer than usual. Then she looked at her notes, and the composure was fully back, and the armor was fully back, and she said, we'll need to prepare testimonies. The Wiesengemot has specific procedural requirements for presenting magical bond evidence. I'll write to Father about the format. Her quill was already moving. Harry watched her write. He was aware, in the way he was aware of most important things, quietly, completely, without making it dramatic, that the private unfiled part of his own mind had been accumulating something for 2 years that also wasn't an argument, that was also just true, and that January was going to force a great many things into the open. He was, privately, not opposed to that. Draco Malfoy found him in the corridor outside Charms on the last Thursday before the Christmas holidays. Not accidentally. He'd been angling toward a conversation for 2 weeks. Harry had felt it in the increasing frequency of the complicated look, the way he'd nearly spoken 3 times in the library and turned away each time. Today he didn't turn away. My father filed the challenge, he said, without preamble. He was alone, which was notable. Draco without Crabbe and Goyle was a deliberate choice. I know, Harry said. He's not going to succeed, Draco said. His voice was doing something difficult, the flatness of someone keeping emotion out of a sentence that was full of it. I looked up the Accord's legal standing. It's older than the Wiesengemott's current charter. If Greengrass's father argues it correctly, the challenge fails on procedural grounds before it gets to the substance. Harry looked at him. You looked it up. I have a library, Draco said, slightly defensive. My father doesn't know I looked it up. Harry was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Draco held his gaze with the specific difficulty of someone doing something that doesn't come naturally to them. Because I told Daphne in September that he was going to challenge the Accord, he said. And because, he stopped. Something worked in his expression. Because I know what it's like to not have any say in what your family does. A pause. And you're going to have to stand in front of the Wiesengemott in January and let my father try to take your family apart, and I thought. He stopped again. What? Harry said. I thought you should know he's weaker going in than he thinks he is, Draco said. He filed early because he panicked. He doesn't have his full coalition. Knott and Parkinson are with him, and Avery, but the Knotts are hedging and Parkinson's worried about how it looks. His jaw tightened. He overextended. Harry looked at him for a long moment. This was Draco Malfoy, who had been performing the person his father needed him to be since before Harry had known him, standing in a corridor without his accessories and telling Harry something that would make his father very angry if he knew. Thank you, Harry said. Draco nodded, once, the curt nod of someone accepting acknowledgement without knowing what to do with gratitude. He turned to go. Draco, Harry said. He stopped. The coalition hedging, Harry said. The Knotts. If that's visible enough for you to see from your position, Daphne's father will want to know before January. If you're willing. Draco turned back slowly. He looked at Harry with the complicated expression, the cage and the intelligence and the thing that was working underneath both of them, the thing that didn't fit the role he'd been given. I'll think about it, he said. He walked away down the corridor, and Harry watched him go, and thought about what Daphne had said in September. He's been given a role the same way you have, and unlike you, he hasn't figured out yet that the role is a cage, and thought that maybe, slowly, he was beginning to. The corridor outside Charms was emptying out around him, students moving toward the last class of term, and in 4 days he'd be on the train back to Wiltshire, and there was a tree to climb and a fire to sit by and a family to go home to, and January and the Wiesengemott and Lucius Malfoy and the loud public world could wait. 4 days, Harry thought. He could do 4 days. Chapter 6, Blood and Magic. Greengrass Manor in January had a specific quality that Harry had noticed in no other place he'd ever been, which admittedly wasn't many, but was enough to establish a comparison. It was the quality of a house that took winter seriously, not grimly, not with the performative austerity of a house trying to look impressive in difficult conditions, but genuinely, the way a place settled deeper into itself when the cold came, the fires larger, the rooms warmer, the stone walls doing what stone walls had been doing for 4 centuries, keeping everything outside firmly outside. He'd spent Christmas climbing the tree. Astoria had been insufferably delighted about this. She'd stood at the base of it on the first morning of the holidays in her winter coat with her arms crossed and an expression of absolute authority, directing him through the lower branches with the confidence of someone who had been doing this since she was 5 and considered herself a credentialed expert. He'd fallen once, caught himself on the second branch with a grip that was more instinct than plan, and Astoria had said, "See, you've got it," with the serene confidence of someone for whom falling and catching yourself were simply 2 parts of the same motion. Daphne had watched from the window with a book she wasn't reading. He knew she wasn't reading it because every time he looked up she was looking at him rather than the page, and every time he looked up she immediately looked at the page, and the bond carried a low warm thread of something that she was very carefully not examining too closely and that he was, with equal care, not pointing out. January 6th was when Cyrus called them into his study and the comfortable interlude ended. The study was a room Harry had spent a great deal of time in over the past year and a half. Cyrus conducted most of his serious conversations here, surrounded by the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the large desk that was always covered in documents in an arrangement that looked chaotic and was, Harry had come to understand, precisely organized according to a system only Cyrus fully understood. There were 2 chairs on the visitor's side of the desk and a third that had appeared sometime in the last 6 months in a slightly different position, slightly closer to the fire, which Harry had started occupying without anyone saying anything about it and which he had the clear sense had been placed there deliberately. Cyrus was standing when they came in, which was unusual. He had papers on the desk and the Greengrass family seal out, which meant documents had been prepared, and his expression had the quality it had when he was briefing them on something significant, present, specific, none of the social warmth he deployed in family contexts, all the intelligence focused forward. "Sit," he said. They sat. "January 14th is 8 days away," Cyrus said. "I want to go through what happens, what each of us does, and what Lucius is likely to try. After that we go through it again until it's not new information, just recall." He looked at them both in turn. "Questions before I start?" "Draco said the coalition is thinner than Lucius thinks," Harry said. "Knots are hedging. Parkinsons are worried about optics." Cyrus looked at him. "When did you speak to Draco Malfoy?" "Last Thursday. He came to find me." "On his own?" "On his own. Without Crabbe and Goyle." Something shifted in Cyrus's expression, the rapid recalculation of new information against existing models. "What else did he say?" Harry went through it. Cyrus listened with the focused stillness he brought to information he considered load-bearing, and when Harry finished he was quiet for a moment, and then he looked at Daphne. "You established this contact," he said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was the specific acknowledgement of someone recognizing strategic work." "In September," she said. "He came to me. I kept the channel open." Cyrus nodded once. Turned back to his papers. "The knots hedging changes the arithmetic considerably. I've been counting Lucius's coalition at 7 solid votes plus the 2 Lucius himself controls through proxies. If the knots move to neutral, that's down to 6, and 6 cannot override the procedural threshold required to challenge a pre-charter magical bond." He looked up. "Which means Lucius's challenge fails before it reaches substantive argument, exactly as Draco assessed." "But Lucius doesn't know the knots are hedging," Daphne said. "Not yet. He may find out before the 14th. Cyrus picked up one of the papers. "Which is why I want to be prepared for both versions of the hearing. The version where the challenge fails procedurally, and the version where Lucius recounts enough support to force a substantive hearing." "What happens in the substantive hearing?" Harry asked. "We argue the accord's validity on its merits. Magical bond evidence, the circumstances of invocation, the nature of the protection offered versus the protection available at Privet Drive." Cyrus paused. "And you both testify." Harry had been expecting this. He'd been turning it over since the conversation in the Great Hall, the public version, the Wizengamot, the full visibility of everything being argued in front of the people who made decisions about the wizarding world. "What do I say?" "What's true," Cyrus said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less. The Wizengamot is very good at detecting rehearsed testimony and very responsive to genuine accounts. You tell them what your life was before, what the accord offered, what the protection has been." He held Harry's gaze. "You don't need to perform anything. You just need to be exactly what you are." Harry nodded. Daphne affirms the bond's authenticity from the initiating side, she felt the family magic respond, she affirms it continues to function correctly, she addresses any suggestion that the bond was coerced or manufactured. Cyrus set down the paper. "And Serena and I argue the legal standing." "And Dumbledore?" Daphne asked. Cyrus was quiet for a moment. "Dumbledore will attend. He may be called to testify regarding the original Blood Ward arrangement. If he is, I expect him to be honest, which is something he does with more consistency when he has no viable alternative. A pause. "He's sent me a letter." "What did it say?" Harry asked. Cyrus looked at him with the level, unsentimental gaze he used for things he wanted Harry to have without softening. It said that he would not contest the accord's validity. That whatever his concerns about Harry's location and training, the accord has clearly provided genuine protection, of which the events of December are, in his words, conclusive evidence. He paused. He also said that he is sorry for underestimating what the Greengrass family's magic was capable of providing. Which is the closest Albus Dumbledore has come to saying he was wrong about something in a long time. Harry sat with that for a moment. The complicated feeling it produced was, not simple. Dumbledore had made a mistake that had cost Harry 9 years in a cupboard, and Dumbledore had also just decided, in the face of something that could have been a political battle, not to fight. Both of those things were true and neither cancelled the other. "Right," Harry said. "Right," Cyrus agreed, and picked up the next paper. The days between the briefing and the 14th were not anxious. Harry had noticed this about himself, that in the period before significant events, he moved into a kind of operational clarity that pushed anxiety to the margins and replaced it with focused preparation. He worked through his testimony with Cyrus until it was second nature. He ran through every variation of the hearing with Daphne until they'd addressed every angle Lucius might try. He wrote to Hermione, who sent back 4 inches of parchment on Wisengamot procedure and a separate note that said, "You'll be fine. You're always fine," which is statistically frustrating, and which he appreciated more than the 4 inches. He wrote to Ron, who said, "Smash him," and nothing else, which Harry also appreciated. On the evening of the 13th, he sat in Cyrus's study alone. Cyrus had left him there deliberately after their last preparation session, in the quiet way that Cyrus provided space, and looked at the fire and thought about Lucius Malfoy. He thought about the face at the feast, watching him across the great hall. The cool assessment of someone measuring a piece on a board. The absolute certainty in that assessment that Harry was movable, that he was a piece rather than a player, that the right pressure applied in the right place would return him to the configuration Lucius needed. Harry thought about what it felt like to sit in that great hall with the bond settled in his chest and Daphne's magical signature in his awareness and the solid certain weight of 2 years of genuine family behind him, and know, not believe, not hope, know, that Lucius Malfoy was looking at something he fundamentally could not understand and drawing conclusions from a model that didn't apply. The fire popped. Arrhythmus, Daphne's cat, had materialized on the chair opposite and was watching Harry with the severe assessment his name implied. "I know," Harry told him. The cat blinked once, slowly, and settled his chin on his paws. The door opened. Not Cyrus, lighter footfall, and the bond gave the specific warm signal that was particular to one person. Daphne sat on the arm of the chair nearest the fire, which was not where she usually sat, which was either a statement about the fire's warmth on a cold January evening or something else. She had her hair down, which she did in the evenings at home, and she was in the grey jumper she wore when she wasn't performing Greengrass composure for anyone. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Wasn't trying yet," he said. "Thinking. About tomorrow? About Lucius?" He paused. "About what he expects to find." "And what does he expect to find?" "A boy who can be frightened out of the things he has," Harry said. "A boy whose attachment to your family is fragile enough that a good argument can dissolve it." He looked at the fire. "He doesn't understand what the accord is." "Not really. He understands it as a legal instrument, something with clauses and contestable provisions. He doesn't understand it as a living thing." Daphne was quiet for a moment. "He's a man who has spent his entire life treating magic as a tool," she said. "He doesn't have a framework for magic that has its own agency." "His loss," Harry said. She looked at him. Something in her expression was doing the unfiled thing, the armor slightly open in the way it was only in the evenings at home, in the comfortable spaces where performance was unnecessary. "Harry. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever he says, whatever version of you he tries to argue in front of the Wisengamot, she stopped. I know, he said. I haven't said it yet. You were going to say that it doesn't change anything. That what we have is real and arguing about it publicly doesn't make it less real. That the accord isn't a legal arrangement, it's a fact, and facts don't become less true because someone contests them. She was quiet for a beat. I was going to say that I'm glad you're here. She said it with the direct simplicity she only used for things she'd decided not to soften. That I've been glad since that Tuesday in the garden. And that tomorrow is going to be loud and uncomfortable and politically complex, and I wanted to say it while it's still quiet. The fire was very warm. The cat had closed its eyes. The house's magic hummed very gently in the walls, the way it always did in the evenings, the 400-year presence of a building that had been loved continuously. I'm glad too, Harry said. He said it with the same directness, because Daphne said direct things to people she trusted completely, and he had learned, over 2 years, to do the same. Since that first night. The garden, when the magic went wrong and you came out and said my name and it settled. He paused. I didn't know that was what it was at the time. But I know now. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have said something true and are sitting with the truth of it, which is different from every other kind of silence. Go to sleep, Daphne said finally, standing. You need to be sharp tomorrow. I'm always sharp, he said. You're sharp when rested, she said. When tired you occasionally miss things. Name one thing I've missed. Hermione knowing about the stone since September, she said pleasantly, and was out of the door before he could respond, and he heard her quiet footsteps on the stairs and looked at the fire and the cat and the 400-year walls for a little while longer, and then went to bed. The Wisengamot chamber was older than most things Harry had been inside, older even than Hogwarts felt, with the specific atmospheric weight of a room where consequential decisions had been accumulating in the stones for centuries. It was circular, tiered, the Wisengamot members in their plum-colored robes arranged in the ascending rows like a theater audience at a performance they took very seriously. The seats at the bottom were for the parties in the case, a long table on the left for the Greengrasses, a long table on the right for Lucius Malfoy and his legal representation, and a central space that was neither table nor seats but simply floor, where the people being heard would stand. Harry walked in behind Cyrus and felt the room's attention shift. Not the Hogwarts Great Hall attention, that had been surprise and expectation, the weight of a legend meeting a person. This was different. This was the attention of people who made laws about his life settling their assessment of someone they had been arguing about in the abstract for 12 years, and finding the abstract rather inadequate to the actual presence. He walked straight. He sat down at the table without looking around the chamber, which he had learned from Cyrus was precisely the correct response. You acknowledged the room with your entry and then you treated it as a workspace, because the moment you started performing for your audience you had already begun to lose. Lucius Malfoy was at the opposing table. He was, Harry had expected impressive, and he was that, but he was also something else, a man who was very good at projecting certainty and who was, this morning, projecting it with the specific energy of someone whose certainty was doing slightly more work than usual. Harry felt it the way he felt all things, not with his eyes but with the full awareness his training had built, the comprehensive reading of magical and physical and social information simultaneously. Lucius's magical signature was cold and controlled, his posture immaculate, his expression the surface of a deep water that was moving fast underneath. He was worried. Not visibly. Not in any way that would register to a casual observer. But Harry was not a casual observer, and the worry was there, and it told him that Draco had been right, the coalition was thinner than Lucius had built his plan around. Lucius looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Neither of them looked away for a moment, and then Harry looked at Cyrus's papers, because he had established his position and there was nothing further to prove in that exchange. The chief warlock opened the session. Lucius's legal argument was sophisticated. Harry gave it that. The wizard he'd brought, a man named Alderman Crouch, no relation to Bartemius, a specialist in ancient magical law with a reputation that several members of the Wisengamot clearly considered formidable, was precise and thorough and had clearly done genuine research. He argued the blood ward primacy with a technical fluency that acknowledged the accord's age and then attempted to circumvent it by arguing that the specific magical circumstances of Lily Potter's sacrifice created a unique and categorically superior protection that no subsequent arrangement could supersede. It was, Harry thought, genuinely the best argument available from Lucius's position. He had clearly decided that the accord's pre-charter status made direct legal challenge untenable, and so he was arguing the sacrifice's magic as a categorical exception, something so specific and so powerful that it overrode ordinary precedent. Cyrus let him finish. Then stood. The argument presented, Cyrus said, in the particular measured tone Harry had heard him use when he was about to dismantle something carefully, rests on a premise that requires the chamber's examination. My colleague contends that the magic of Lily Potter's sacrifice creates a protection so singular that it supersedes all subsequent magical claims. I want to address that premise directly before we discuss precedent. He paused. The magic of Lily Potter's sacrifice was real, was powerful, and functioned as documented. What it created was a conditional protection, conditional on the loving intent of the protecting household. This condition was not met. The protection degraded. He held up a document. I have here an assessment from the Department of Magical Law's own ward analysts, requested 6 months ago and received last week, confirming that the blood protection at number 4, Privet Drive had degraded below minimum functional threshold at least 3 years before the accord was invoked. For 3 years, the protection everyone in this chamber believed was keeping Harry Potter safe was providing no meaningful magical security at all. The chamber went quiet. The kind of quiet that meant everyone was processing the same piece of information simultaneously and arriving at the same implication. The accord, Cyrus continued, was invoked into a protection vacuum. There was no superior prior claim to supersede. There was nothing. He set the document down. What there was a 9-year-old boy in a cupboard, with no magical protection, carrying the most significant magical target in Britain on his forehead. He looked at the assembled Wisengamot. The Greengrass Accord did not circumvent the blood wards. The blood wards had circumvented themselves. The accord filled a void. Harry watched Lucius during this. Lucius's face did not change. The deep water moved faster. Alderman Crouch stood. The degradation of the blood ward, whatever its extent, does not retroactively, it does, said a voice from the Wisengamot benches, and Harry looked up. Minerva McGonagall was on her feet, in the plum robes of a full Wisengamot member, with the expression she wore when she had decided something was going to be said and she was going to say it. I objected to leaving Harry Potter with those people in 1981, she said, and her voice carried the particular quality of someone making a statement they had been waiting over a decade to make. I observed the household for a full day before the placement. I communicated my concerns to the headmaster. She looked at Dumbledore, who was in the visitors section and whose expression had the quality of a man accepting something that had arrived later than it should have. The decision was made over my objection. I want that on the record. And I want it on the record that the Greengrass family acted when the institutions responsible had failed to. Crouch started to speak. The chief warlock held up a hand, and Crouch sat. The ward analyst report will be entered into evidence, the chief warlock said. Continue, Mr. Greengrass. Cyrus continued. He walked through the accord's legal standing, its pre-charter status, its historical precedents, 2 previous Wisengamot sessions in which pre-charter magical bonds had been contested and upheld, and 1 session in the 17th century in which a challenge to a pre-charter bond had been dismissed on the grounds that the Wisengamot did not have the authority to override magic older than its own institutional existence. When he finished, the chamber had the quality of a room that had made up its mind and was waiting for the form to confirm it. I'd like to call Harry Potter, Cyrus said. Harry stood in the center of the chamber and felt 600 years of consequential decisions in the stones around him and thought, I have been in a Hogwarts dungeon with Voldemort. I have been in a cupboard under the stairs for 9 years. This is a room with old men in purple robes. I am not afraid of this room. He was not afraid of this room. Harry James Potter, the chief warlock, said, "You are here to testify regarding the Greengrass Accord and the nature of the protection it has provided. You are sworn to truthful testimony." "I understand," Harry said. "Describe, in your own words, the circumstances preceding the Accord's invocation." Harry described it. He was direct and specific, and he did not editorialize, and he did not perform. He said what the cupboard was. He said how long he'd been in it. He said what the clothes were and what the food had been and what the bruise on his arm had come from, which was Vernon Dursley's hand. He said it plainly, the way he said things that were true, not to generate a reaction, just because they were true and had happened and were part of what had led to where he was standing. The chamber was very quiet. He described the Tuesday, and Daphne, and the Accord, and what the manors magic had felt like when it accepted him. He described 2 years of education and training and what it had felt like, after 9 years of systematic reduction, to be treated as someone with a mind worth developing. He described December, Quirrell, the stone, what he'd done and why, the bond's role in the protective magic that had driven the possession back. When he finished, Alderman Crouch stood. "Mr. Potter," Crouch said, and his voice had the texture of a man deploying his best remaining tool, "you are 11 years old. You have spent the last 2 years in the care of a pure-blood family with a significant financial and political interest in their association with you. Is it possible that your assessment of the Greengrass family's motivations is influenced by your situation?" Harry looked at him. "You're asking if I've been manipulated into thinking they're my family." "I'm asking if you can be certain." "Yes," Harry said. "I can be certain." He held Crouch's gaze with the level attention he brought to things he meant completely. "The Accord was invoked by old magic that doesn't answer to financial interest. The family magic that responded to me isn't something you can strategize. My sister, Daphne's sister, Astoria, who is 8 years old, spent the first hour she knew me telling me I could have her old bedroom and that my hair was untidy. If that's a coordinated manipulation campaign, it's the most elaborately unconvincing one in history." Several members of the Wisengamot made sounds. The chief warlock may have made a sound. Cyrus, at the table, was looking at the papers with the absolute focus of someone who was not going to allow his expression to do anything in a formal proceeding. "The Greengrass family," Harry continued, "took me in because their magic told them to and because it was the right thing to do. I know the difference between people treating me as an asset and people treating me as a person. I spent 9 years learning that difference from the wrong side of it." He kept his voice level. "What they gave me is real. The Accord is real. I would not be standing here telling you that if it weren't." Crouch looked at him for a moment. He was a good enough advocate to recognize when a witness had said the definitive version of what they were going to say. "No further questions," he said, and sat down. Harry walked back to the table. Cyrus's hand moved very briefly to Harry's shoulder as he sat, not a gesture of congratulation, something quieter than that, the touch of someone who was proud without needing to announce it, and then was gone, and Cyrus stood for his final summary. Lucius made one more move. It came after Cyrus's summary, during the period of final statements, and it was the move Harry had expected, not the legal challenge, which was clearly failing, but the personal one. Lucius himself stood, dismissing Crouch with a small gesture, and addressed the chamber with the absolute composure of someone who had been managing rooms full of powerful people since he was 20 years old. "I want to address the chamber not as a legal matter but as a matter of wizarding principle," he said, and his voice was perfectly modulated, warm and concerned in the specific way that Lucius Malfoy was warm and concerned when he needed something. "Harry Potter is the child of 2 magical heroes. He carries a destiny that affects every family in this chamber. The question before us is not merely the technicality of which magical arrangement takes precedence." He looked at Harry with the expression of someone performing deep concern for an audience. "It is whether this boy, this child, should be bound by old magic to a family that did not know him, that he did not choose, before he was old enough to understand what was being chosen for him. He paused, letting it sit. The accord was invoked without Harry's full and informed consent, Lucius said. He was 9 years old. He did not understand what the bond would mean, what it would demand of him, what it would bind him to. I ask this chamber, is that what we want for the boy who saved our world? A bond he walked into as a child, shaped by the manipulations of a family whose interests may not align with his own? The chamber was quiet. Lucius had, Harry thought, genuinely good instincts. He'd abandoned the legal argument the moment it was lost and pivoted to something that couldn't be answered with documents or precedents, the emotional argument, the welfare of a child argument, the kind of argument that worked on people because it appeared to be about Harry while actually being about Lucius's need to control the situation. Harry stood up. Not because Cyrus had signaled him. Not because it was his turn. He stood up because he had something to say, and waiting for the correct procedural moment was less important than saying it. The chief warlock looked at him. "Mr. Potter, I understood what the accord meant," Harry said. He looked at Lucius directly. "I was 9 years old and I had been living in a cupboard under the stairs for 8 years. I was not naive about what was being offered or what it meant. I said yes because I understood it and because it was the truest thing anyone had ever offered me." He kept his voice even. "Lucius Malfoy is asking you to look at a bond one chose and call it manipulation. He is asking you to look at a family that saved my life and call their motives suspect. He is asking you to look at 2 years of genuine protection, including the events of last December, which are in the record, and treat them as a political inconvenience." He paused. "I want to be clear about what that argument actually is. It's not concern for my welfare. If it were concern for my welfare, it would have arrived 11 years ago, before I was put in the cupboard. It arrives now because the accord means I am not available to be managed by people who need me to be manageable." He looked at the chamber, at the assembled Wizengamot, at McGonagall who had said her piece, at Dumbledore sitting in the visitors section with his half-moon glasses and his complicated expression, at Draco Malfoy who was in the public gallery because of course he was, watching with the intense focus of someone taking notes. "I am not a piece on someone's board," Harry said. "I am not a destiny or a target or a political variable. I am Harry Potter. I am a member of the Greengrass family by accord, by magic, and by every choice I've made in the last 2 years. That is not going to change because it's inconvenient for someone." He sat down. The chamber was very quiet. Lucius looked at Harry across the space between the tables, and the deep water was not moving fast anymore. It was still. The specific stillness of someone who has run a calculation and arrived at an answer they didn't want. He looked at Harry and Harry looked back, and the accord bond sat warm and certain in Harry's chest, and the manors magic was 3 counties away, but he could feel it like a bass note, like bedrock, like 400 years of a house that knew his name. Lucius looked away first. The vote was not close. 11 in favor of upholding the accord's validity. 4 abstentions. 2 against. The 2 against were Avery and a man named Mulciber whose presence on the Wizengamot Harry filed under things to discuss with Cyrus later. The 4 abstentions included the Knots, which confirmed Draco's intelligence precisely. The chief warlock declared the accord valid, the challenge dismissed, and the Greengrass family's legal guardianship of Harry Potter confirmed under the provisions of pre-charter magical law. It was, procedurally, very undramatic. A declaration in measured official language, a formal entry into the record, the sound of plum-robed witches and wizards shuffling papers and moving toward their next concern. The machinery of institutional decision-making doing what it did, grinding forward, converting conflict into record, archiving the resolution. Harry sat in his chair and felt the accord bond pulse once, warm and deep and resonant, like the manors magic had felt the decision and responded to it. Cyrus put his hand on Harry's shoulder again. Properly this time, not briefly, the full weight of it, the genuine expression of something he usually communicated through indirection and strategy and carefully placed books. "Well done," Cyrus said quietly. Harry looked at him. This man who had sat across from a 9-year-old in an enormous kitchen and asked if he was good at weeding. Who had spent 2 years giving him material worth learning. Who had stood in a chalk circle and offered him a name and a blood and a protection with the full magical weight of 4 centuries behind the words. "Thank you," Harry said. "For everything." Cyrus looked at him for a moment. His expression did something that it rarely did in professional contexts, opened. "You don't need to thank us," he said. "You are ours. That's not a transaction." Harry nodded. Filed it. The private unfiled part of his mind where he kept the things he was only beginning to have the vocabulary for. Serena was across the room speaking with McGonagall and another which Harry didn't recognize, her hand moving as she made a point, elegant and precise and completely in her element. Daphne was at the table beside him, already writing something in her small neat hand, debrief notes, or follow-up items, or possibly a letter to Astoria with a full account, which was the kind of thing Astoria had specifically requested in her last 6 letters. "You stood up," Daphne said, without looking up from her writing. "Yes. That wasn't in the plan." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "Writing. It was the right call," she said. He looked at her. "High praise. Don't push it." He almost said something. The private unfiled thing pressing toward expression with the urgency of something that had been accumulating for 2 years and had run out of room. The warmth of the previous night, the fire and the grey jumper and "I'm glad you're here," which he had also been glad about, was also true, had been true since the garden and the compass settling. But they were in the Wizengamot chamber with Cyrus 2 feet away and the public gallery still visible, and this was not the right context for the thing that wanted to be said, and Harry had learned, from 2 years in a family that understood timing, that some things were worth the right moment. He looked forward. Lucius Malfoy was leaving the chamber through the upper doors, Crouch at his shoulder, the two of them moving with the controlled efficiency of people who had lost and intended to lose in private. Lucius did not look back. From the public gallery, Draco was watching his father leave. His expression was complicated in the specific way it had been in the corridor outside Charms, the cage and the intelligence and the working thing underneath both of them. He looked down at Harry for a moment, and Harry looked up, and something passed between them across the height of the chamber, not friendship, not yet, not even close, but acknowledgement. Something real enough to build on, if someone decided to. Harry raised an eyebrow. Draco looked at his father's retreating back. Then he looked at Harry again, and the corner of his mouth moved, not much, barely anything, but something, and then he turned and walked out through a different door than Lucius. Outside the ministry, the January afternoon was grey and very cold, the kind of London cold that came in off the river and committed to it. The fountain in the atrium was running and magical, entirely unconcerned with what had just happened on the floor above. The people in the lifts were carrying their files and their concerns and their ministry business, and none of them were particularly interested in a family of 4 standing in the entrance hall. Serena said, "Home," with the particular warm certainty of someone for whom the word was entirely uncomplicated. They went home. The tree was impossible to climb in January. Harry had made this discovery in the first week of the holidays and had reported it to Astoria, who had looked at the frost-rigid branches with the expression of someone reassessing seasonal strategy. "We'll come back to it in March," she'd said. March, he'd agreed. Now, 3 days after the Wizengamot, standing in the garden in the cold afternoon light with his breath making small clouds, he was back in front of the tree. Not to climb it. Just standing there in the way he sometimes stood in places that felt important, present, taking it in, letting the meaning of it settle. He heard footsteps on the frost-stiff grass behind him. "The hearing's been in the Prophet," Daphne said. She stopped beside him, close enough that their arms nearly touched, which was the distance they defaulted to without either of them making a decision about it. She had a copy of the paper, which she'd folded with characteristic precision. Page 3. The coverage is neutral, which in Prophet terms means they couldn't figure out whose side to be on, so they reported the facts. First time for everything, Harry said. She looked at him. Something in her expression was the evening version, not the chamber composure, not the armor, the grey jumper version. Draco wrote to me this morning. What did he say? That his father is reassessing certain alliances and that he, Draco, has been given somewhat more latitude than usual in his movements, which he seems to be interpreting as an opportunity. She paused. He didn't say for what. But the tone of the letter was, she thought about the word. Tentative. Like someone testing if a door is actually open. It is, Harry said. The door. If he wants to walk through it. That's what I wrote back. She was quiet for a moment. It may not go anywhere. He has a long way to go. I know. I wanted you to know I think it's worth trying anyway. He looked at her. She was looking at the tree, and the frost light was very clear on her face, and the bond was carrying the same warm certain signal it had carried in the chamber when he'd stood up, when she'd said right call, when she'd come into Cyrus's study the night before the hearing and said the most direct version of something she usually kept filed away. Daphne, he said. She looked at him. I know this isn't the right time, he said, because the right time is probably 3 years from now when we're not 11, but I have been thinking about something he stopped. Started again. You told me the night before the hearing that you were glad I was here. I remember, she said. I'm glad too. I said that. But I didn't say all of it. He looked at the tree, at the frost-white branches, at the garden he'd been standing in since Christmas, learning to be someone who stood in gardens without bracing for the end of it. When I was in the cupboard I used to, he stopped again. This was harder. This was the hardest kind of honest because it was the kind with no defensive layer. I used to think about what it would be like if there was somewhere that felt like, not just safe. Mine. I didn't have a word for it that was specific enough. I thought it was a place, or a feeling about a place, and then, he looked at her. It's not a place. Daphne was very still beside him. Not the controlled stillness. The other kind. It's the compass, he said. The thing you felt on Tuesday. In your chest. That's what I mean. The winter garden was very quiet. The frost was brilliant on the grass. From the upper window of the house, if someone had been looking, they would have seen 2 11-year-olds standing under a bare winter tree with their arms almost touching and the morning light very clear and cold and equal on both of them. Daphne reached out and took his hand. Not like a statement. Not like an argument or a strategy or a thing to be analyzed and filed. Just, his hand, in hers, with the simple certainty of someone who had been trying not to do this for 2 years and had decided that today was the right day to stop trying. The bond blazed between them, warm and certain and exactly as old and exactly as alive as the magic in the walls of the house behind them. The compass, she said, quietly. Yes, he said. I know, she said. They stood in the garden and the frost began, slowly, to melt in the late morning sun, and the tree above them was bare and patient and waiting for March, when the branches would hold weight again and Astoria would teach them both to climb it, and the wizarding world outside the gate was already moving toward its next configuration, Lucius recalibrating, Draco testing a door, Dumbledore reckoning with an outcome he hadn't designed, Voldemort reduced to a cold flea thing in the dark, somewhere. Distant, waiting, but that was outside the gate. Inside the gate, the accord bond sat warm and certain in both of their chests, and the manor knew their names, and Harry Potter stood in a garden with his hand held by the person who had found him, and knew, with the same absolute clarity as the mirror, as the stone, as everything that was real rather than hoped for, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be,